So how are you guys? I am back again with a very fun and exciting new video, which is, what if Deku had the life giver quirk? Before part 1 started, do like, share and subscribe to the channel and comment down your favorite part. Your one like and one subscribe motivate me to upload more fanfic like these for you all. So without any waste of time, now let's start the fanfic. Excuse me, doctor, but you're mistaken. My son definitely has a quirk, interrupted Inko Midoriya coolly, in confusion at the man's words. Honestly, the nerve of this man, telling her that her baby boy didn't have a quirk, but she knew. There was no other explanation for what had occurred, it had to have been the result of a quirk. Even if she couldn't see it, she still felt it. She looked down at the boy she was standing behind and leaned down. Izuku, sweetie, why don't you tell him about your friend? Okay, he chirped, before closing his eyes, trying to concentrate on recreating the strange sound he had heard earlier that day. Wow, Kachan, I hope I get my quirk soon. Yeah, well whatever it is, it's not gonna be as cool as mine. Izuku had gone to sleep hoping, praying, that he'd get a quirk soon. Everyone else at his daycare had one, and his best friend Kachan had a really cool one. He said he could make nitro, something out of his sweat and make it explode. Izuku had kept his hopes up when the first child had gotten their quirk, and when Katsuki had gotten his, and when he still hadn't gotten his and the others started whispering. He never considered the possibility that he could be quirkless. After all, what 4-year-old was pessimistic about their dream? All he ever wanted was to be a hero, just like All Might, the #1 hero in the world. So why was it taking so long to get his? Izuku had never really noticed, but his mother Inko's smiles had become more and more strained lately, when she watched him watch video after video of All Might's battles, when she would watch him and Katsuki play heroes and villains, and when he would excitedly talk about what type of quirk he would be getting. Please be a good one, he thought as he closed his eyes and drifted off to sleep. Izuku had been walking down an alleyway, when he noticed a man lying in a patch of grass behind the nearby parking lot. After briefly staring at the sight in confusion, he saw something that looked to be blood spilling out from nearby. Shit, we lost him. Izuku jumped at the sudden noise and turned to see a group of men in suits. Do you think he went into one of the houses? He asked, looking around. He can't get far without bleeding out, another one replied. There should be a trail somewhere around here. Hey kid. Izuku had gone back to staring at the man who was bleeding out, but turned to see the group running towards him. Huh? He asked. Did you see a bleeding man around here? One of them asked, he and the others standing imposingly. He's tall and has black hair. Izuku stared at him for a moment, thinking about the man who was hidden from their view. Yes, he replied with an impassive face, before pointing in the opposite direction. He went that way. He shouldn't be far, a different man said, looking out into the alleyway that Izuku was pointing to. Thanks, kid. Let's go. He ran off, with the others following behind. However, one of them stayed, and was looking the other direction, but Izuku kept his arm pointed in the direction the others were going, his expression unwavering. Hey, what are you still doing there? He heard. The man who stayed then finally left, running to the rest. Throughout the lie, Izuku felt not a single ounce of fear. He believed that the man who was lying in the grass was someone who felt alone. Just like he did, Izuku's eyes shot open at the sound of his mother waking him. Izuku, baby, it's time to wake up, she said, lightly pushing his shoulder. When she saw that he was awake, she planted a kiss to his forehead and pulled away his blanket. I made some katsudon for you, Tilda. Okay, mommy, he replied groggily. When Inko stood up and left the room, Izuku took a deep breath and stretched, before rubbing his eyes and fully sitting up. When he draped his legs over the bed and slid off to stand, he saw something move out of the corner of his eye. When he turned to look at it, he became confused at the sight of a butterfly fluttering around his room, before settling on the wall beside the door. Huh, he thought. Izuku stood up and walked over to where the butterfly was perched, and just stared at it curiously, before reaching out a hand towards his surprise. However, the butterfly flew over to his hand. When it landed on his finger, the butterfly made a strange noise before shifting into, or rather, back into, the crayon he had been drawing with just the night before, which had fallen to the ground. Izuku picked up the toy and stared at it in awe for a moment, before breaking out into a grin. Mommy. Mommy. he yelled out, opening the door and running to the kitchen. I got my Quirk. Inko turned around from preparing breakfast to see her son running up to her. Really? She walked out and slightly bent down, placing her hands on her knees. Well, show me then, honey. Izuku nodded and closed his eyes. Clutching the crayon tightly, he tried to remember the sound that the butterfly had made, but he really wasn't sure what else to do. After a moment of him feeling the drawing utensil not changing, Izuku opened his eyes in confusion at the failure, when he noticed a strange figure suddenly floating next to his mother. Ah! He cried out, jumping back and pointing a finger at the intruder. Mommy, there's someone there. At his exclamation and sudden fear, Inko turned to look where Izuku was pointing, but was only met with the sight of empty air. Huh, there's no one here besides us, Izuku. Thinking he was just making it up, she started to walk towards him. No, Mommy, he's right there. Izuku interrupted, shaking his arms in front of him, before frantically pointing at the figure. He's gonna hurt, he trailed off his sentence when he saw the strange person also cowering in fear. When he stood up, it lowered its hands back down, and continued to just float motionlessly, as if waiting for a command. Oh. Izuku started to walk towards it, to which it turned around to face him. Before he could study it, however, his mother suddenly enveloped him in a hug. Oh baby, she said, hugging him tightly and rubbing small circles on his back. I know you really want to get your Quirk, but oh. She stopped as she felt another set of arms hugging her side, but when she turned to see who was hugging her, she found nothing but the sight of the dining table. But there's nothing there, she thought in confusion, before coming to a realization. Izuku, she began. Can you see who's hugging my arm? She felt her son nod, before he pulled back and smiled at HJE. I think that's my Quirk, Mommy, he replied. Oh, she said. Oh. She hugged him again. Well, I'm so happy for you. She kissed his cheek, and pulled back to stand up when she felt the pressure on her arm release. Do you wanna go to the Quirk doctor later to register it? She asked him. Izuku nodded enthusiastically. Okay. Well then, said Dr. Tsubasa. I have to admit, this is rather bizarre. He watched the butterfly that previously had been the crayon the child had brought with him flutter about. The pinky toe test is said to be the leading technique in determining quirklessness by quirk specialists for years now, but in your son's case, it ended up actually being proved wrong. He clicked his pen and began writing down notes on his clipboard. So do you believe us now, Doctor? Inko asked. Yes, of course, ma'am, I do now, he replied quickly. I must apologize for my earlier statement. It seemed that either the young boy was the outlier to an otherwise accurate procedure, or the entire thing was wrong this entire time and there were thousands of people currently running around with quirks they didn't know they had. He was much more willing to consider the former. Now then, drive. Tsubasa continued, pushing up the rim of his glasses. Before we continue, can Izuku turn things into other animals, or is it just butterflies? We haven't tried anything else yet, replied Inko. While she knew there was another aspect to his quirk from that mishap at breakfast, she hoped that her son could do more than simply turning things into butterflies. Izuku wanted nothing more than to be a hero, and she would be damned if she didn't try her best to support him. Very well, the doctor replied. He walked up to Izuku, who was looking at the ground while dangling his legs. Izuku, he began, leaning down and handing him a pen. Do you think you could turn this into something else besides a butterfly? Maybe a bird or a plant. The boy took the offered item and started intensely staring at it. Before long, the pen began to shift in form, along with a very peculiar noise that Dr. Tsubasa couldn't quite make out. In the boy's hands was a small dandelion, as if freshly plucked off of the ground. Well, isn't that interesting, he said bemusedly, gently taking the flower and examining it. And to think, it was only a pen mere moments ago. To be frank, I wasn't expecting it to work. There have been quirks that could create plants, but never animals as well. He looked back to the boy's mother. I don't think there has ever been a quirk as unique as your son's. Really? Inko leaned down to look at her son. Did you hear that, Izuku? There's no one else with your quirk. Wow, really? He asked with wide eyes, before breaking out into a grin. I can't wait to tell Kachan. Dr. Tsubasa hummed at the boy's enthusiasm, before pulling out a second pen. Yes, this is cause for some celebration, he said. But you mentioned there was another thing to his quirk. Something about a friend. Yup, Izuku chirped, before pointing to his side. There's a person right there. Doctor. Tsubasa blankly stared at the spot where the boy had pointed in confusion. After a moment of not seeing anything, he tried squinting at the area for any sign of another person occupying that space, but he could see only nothing. I'm not sure I understand, he said awkwardly. Perhaps there's something he was missing. It's okay, doctor, interjected Inko. I couldn't see him either, but you can feel him. Doctor. Tsubasa nodded in understanding, taking a moment to briefly write on his clipboard. I see, he said. Okay, Izuku, the boy looked up at him. Could you please tell your, friend, to give me a high five? He asked, holding out a hand. Okay, he replied, before making a concentrated face. Almost immediately, Tsubasa felt the slap of a small hand make contact with his own. He blinked for a moment from the high five to contemplate what had just happened. A second quirk. Interesting, he muttered, taking a few notes, before looking back up. Is he the same size as you? At the boy's positive reply, he wrote a note about how the size must be linked to his age. Okay, now could you please describe him for me? Izuku began. He looks really yellow, but it's all shiny. Doctor. Tsubasa wrote down gold. And he's wearing a funny hat, and he has lots of purple ladybugs on him. Doctor. Tsubasa wrote down the information before looking back up at the boy expectantly. He tilted his head. He has loopy things on the sides. A bit vague on that, but it was likely an article of clothing. Okay, Tsubasa said. I think that's enough for now. He looked back up to the boys. Mother. You'll need to come back sometime in the future so we can get an accurate description of your son's companion. Now, he clicked his pen in preparation to write. What do you think of naming his quirk, Life Giver? Katsuki Bakugo was bored. He wanted to go to the playground at the park today, but when he didn't see any sign of his friend, his mood dipped considerably. There weren't really any other kids out, so he just resigned himself to just using the swings. Hey, Kachan. Katsuki looked up from where he was sitting to see Izuku running over to him. Guess what? He asked, stopping in front of the other boy with a grin. What? He asked, pushing his feet off of the ground to try and gain momentum in his swing. I got my quirk. At this point Izuku couldn't maintain his excitement, and began jumping up and down. Katsuki was intrigued at the information. Really? He waited until he reached a high point, before jumping off of the swing. The landing kind of hurt his ankles, but he wasn't about to admit it. Well, come on, he said impatiently. Show me. Okay. Izuku closed his eyes and closed his fists, trying to focus. After a few moments, he opened his eyes and grinned at the sight of a familiar golden figure. Ta-da! He exclaimed, holding his hands out, but Katsuki was only met with the sight of empty air. Deku, there's nothing there, he said. Was he being had? Was Izuku just quirkless and playing a trick on him? Before he could voice his irritation, the other boy spoke up. Huh? Izuku asked in confusion, before coming to a realization. Oh. He scratched his head. I think the doctor said no one can see him, he explained, which did little to alleviate Katsuki's growing irritation. But you can feel it. He added. Katsuki, however, was still confused. What do you mean no one can see? He began, but was interrupted by something touching him. What was that? He suddenly asked, wildly looking around. He could see Deku in front of him, but he didn't see him move at all. That was my quirk, Izuku said excitedly. He touched you on the shoulder. Do you want me to do it again? Katsuki was still confused, but he just shrugged. Okay, sure. He wasn't sure why Izuku's quirk was invisible, but everyone else's weren't. He held out a fist to the other boy in invitation. When he felt the sensation of a fist making contact with his own, he looked down with wide eyes. Okay, he said, impressed. I felt that, but, he looked up and saw that Izuku had started moving very slowly. Deku? He asked, but didn't receive a response. Oi, Deku. He tried again, this time moving towards him. What did you do to me? He trailed off as he noticed that he had suddenly started moving fast. Whoa, he whispered in awe, slowly opening and closing a fist. I'm fast, and I feel really strong. He looked back to Izuku. Deku, he said, grinning. I think your quirk gave me a power boost. When he didn't get a response, he frowned. Hey Deku. He tried to use his quirk in an attempt to get the other boy's attention, but found that the sweat on his hands wasn't igniting. Why isn't my quirk working? He asked himself in shock. Deku. Katsuki was now growing scared, his breathing and heart rate increasing. Deku, he said desperately, trying to touch the other boy, but his hand only passed through him. Deku, please. Soon after, Katsuki found himself back in his body, and Izuku was moving normally again, looking back at him in shock. I'm so sorry, Kachan. Izuku exclaimed when he saw Katsuki beginning to cry. I didn't know my quirk could do that, I promise. He moved to wrap his friend in a hug. After some time, Katsuki pulled away. Don't do that again, Yubaka, he said, wiping his tears away with his arm. Sorry. Izuku replied awkwardly, before lighting up. Do you wanna see what else I can do? Seeing Katsuki suddenly grow scared again, he backtracked. I don't have to touch you, he said, quickly waving his arms in front of him. When he saw Katsuki visibly relax, he let out a breath in relief. Okay, Katsuki said quietly. Izuku began, quickly looking around. Wait right here. He ran around the area, looking for a small rock to pick up. When he found one, he picked it up and ran back to where Katsuki was standing. After holding it tightly and focusing, the familiar and really weird sound of something transforming began to play, and Izuku set it on the ground. Before long, a large vine started sprouting from the small rock. What do you think? He asked, looking back at Katsuki, who grinned. That's pretty cool, he praised, the previous accident apparently being forgotten. Can you do more? Izuku tilted his head in deep thought. I don't know, he admitted. I made a butterfly and a flower, but I didn't do anything else. Katsuki began. So you can make plants and animals. He lit up as an idea formed in his head, and promptly turned around, breaking out into a run. Come on, he yelled back. Let's see what else you can do. Okay. Izuku felt guilty for making his friend scared, but he quickly followed behind. Eventually, days turned into months, which then turned into years, and Izuku had grown comfortable with his bizarre quirk, spending as much time as he could to analyze it, especially the ghostly being that was part of it. At first, he believed it was a new friend, but every time Izuku would try to make conversation with it, he would never get a response, either physically or verbally. It would only stare at a random area, only turning when Izuku was paying attention to something specific. Although, there were times where the ghost would automatically do things or react whenever specific things were happening to Izuku, such as catching a glass of water that tipped over the edge of the table, or when Katsuki had tried to surprise him from behind one day and received a kick in return. Now Katsuki wasn't scared of a lot of things, but whatever the hidden part of Deku's quirk was, it frightened him. Which is why he never really antagonized him like the other extras. It was another session with Dr. Tsubasa, that it was concluded that Izuku's quirk was technically summoning the ghost, but he could control it to use Life Giver, using its hands. At first, it looked like they were two separate quirks, which was flat out impossible, but it turns out the two could technically be considered a single quirk, as one couldn't be used without the other. When Izuku brought up that he could already make plants and animals without the use of his companion, Drive, Tsubasa became puzzled. He eventually suggested that perhaps since Izuku could control it, then he could actually use its limbs in place of his own, almost like he was wearing a suit of armor. Aside from the ability to create life out of inanimate objects, the golden being was surprisingly strong, having the strength of several grown men, and could move very quickly, as Izuku had seen when it had caught a glass of water that fell and was just about to hit the floor and break. When his mother asked him if he wanted to actually name his companion, Izuku already had the perfect name, deep within the recesses of his mind. I'll call him Gold Experience, he told her with finality. Hey Deku. Katsuki asked, eyes fixated on the television screen in front of him. You can make any animal you want, right? Yeah, Izuku answered with an equal amount of concentration. Why'd you ask? The two of them were heavily focused on beating each other in a racing game, so several more seconds passed before Katsuki eventually spoke again. You should be able to make people, right? At that, Izuku sharply turned to look at him, which caused the car he was controlling to steer off course, giving the other boy a massive lead. I don't know, he replied awkwardly. That's really weird to ask, Kachan. Katsuki shrugged. Okay, fair enough, he admitted. But did you at least think about it? Izuku said nothing, but that was all he needed to hear. An awkward silence formed between the two of them as they continued playing their video game until the race ended. Do you wanna go outside and try? He offered when the game moved to the character select screen. Kinda, yeah, Izuku admitted. Katsuki stood up and went to turn the console and television off. A few moments later, the two were now standing in the backyard, where Katsuki passed the time making small sparks on his hands while he waited. Okay, Izuku muttered to himself. Making a person shouldn't be too different from all the small animals. I think. Setting down the large ball he was holding on the ground, he summoned Gold Experience, who proceeded to rest its hands on it. A moment later, the familiar sound that played when Life Giver activated softly resonated from the ball, before shifting into what Izuku had envisioned. Deku? Katsuki asked, looking up. At seeing Izuku still standing there, he walked over impatiently, wondering what was taking so long. You done yet? When he stopped beside him, he froze in horror at the sight displayed. In front of Izuku's feet, lay a severed copy of Katsuki's own head. And then it promptly blinked. What the foo? Mitsuki Bakugo watched the two boys fidgeting under her unimpressed stare. So, she began, hands on her hips. What did we learn today? Izuku awkwardly raised a hand. Not to try to make any copies of people I already know because people will think we hurt them. He offered weakly. Mitsuki raised an eyebrow. Okay, she said slowly. Anything else? And Deku can probably make organs and sell them to the black market, Katsuki chimed in, raising his own hand, causing his mother to sharply turn to him. Katsuki. What? Izuku just looked at him in confusion. What do you mean, Kachan? He asked him. The other boy just shrugged. Well, he began. You can make any animal you want, right? Obviously, that includes the things that make them work. So you should be able to make just those parts. Izuku thought about what the other boy had said for a moment. Wait, you're right, he exclaimed. Mitsuki sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. Katsuki, she said exasperatedly. You know that's insanely illegal. Not to mention that'll land Izuku in prison for up to 10 years. All right, fair enough, that's a good point, the boy relented. But what about healing? Well class, the teacher began, picking up a stack of papers. Since you're in your third year of junior high now, you'll want to start filling out your career choice packets. He paused for dramatic effect, before continuing. But I'm sure you're all aiming for the hero course anyway. At that, the entire class began cheering excitedly, accidentally activating their quirks and violating several rules. Oi, teach, yelled a voice. The class immediately grew silent and turned to see Katsuki leaning back in his chair. Don't lump me and Deku in with these extras. Oh, that's right, the two of you are going to be trying out at UA, right, Bakugo-kun? The teacher asked, smiling. His question surprised the class, causing them to start whispering about the two boys' decision in schooling. Wait, they're going for UA. The #1 hero school in Japan. Almost no one gets in. Katsuki smirked and rested his elbow on his chair, turning to face his classmates. Well, none of you extras could get in. He ignored their protests as if he never heard them. But me and Deku here, he said, pointing to Izuku. We aced the mock exams easily. And that's not mentioning our quirks, too. Yeah, that's true, Bakugo and Midoriya won't have much trouble getting in. Wait, why Midoriya, though? Isn't his quirk really weak? He's actually got that weird ghost thing if I remember correctly. While Izuku stayed silent from these comments, Katsuki had to answer for him. And don't you forget it, he said with a cocky expression. Deku might not be as powerful as me. Gee, thanks, Kachan, Izuku muttered. But his quirk is 100 times better than whatever you extras could pull out of your collective asses. We're gonna be the best damned heroes you'll ever see. Deku. Izuku looked up from packing his bag to see Katsuki walking towards him. You know you've gotta stand up to those trash talkers sooner or later. Izuku sighed in exasperation at the topic once again being brought up. Kachan, he began. You know I don't care about whatever they say. Katsuki glowered as he readjusted his backpack. Yeah, well you should, he replied. You have a good quirk. I know you have a good quirk. So why shouldn't they? All you have to do is show them what your weird ghost can do and they'll shut up. Izuku grinned. To an outsider, Katsuki may come off as extremely arrogant, but he knew that the other boy just felt that he had to be that way, in order to become a hero that could protect his friends and family. That was why every time someone voiced their doubts about his quirk, Katsuki always felt the need to defend him, even if he didn't need it. For a moment there it sounded like you cared. The other boy just snorted in response. PFF'd, don't get ahead of yourself, he said. Just gotta make sure my number 2 will be able to keep up. He turned around and started to walk away, before turning back around. You wanna go get some ice cream and hit the arcade? Izuku shook his head. No, thanks, he replied. I think I'm just gonna go home. Katsuki shrugged. Well, your loss, then. He turned back around. Catch you tomorrow, I guess. Izuku, left back to his thoughts, put on his backpack and proceeded to walk out of the classroom, thinking about his friend's offer. And it doesn't really compare to gelato, he thought, before suddenly pausing. Wait, gelato? He asked himself. He liked sweets as much as the next guy, but he knew for a fact that he had never had Italian-style ice cream in his life. He wondered how he was familiar with the foreign word, before eventually shaking his head and continuing on his walk home. Oh ho, what's this? Izuku turned around in the tunnel he was walking through to see a mass of sludge suddenly growing larger. It's a disguise I can use. Huh, he began, before his eyes widened in fear. What? He tried to yell out, but the villain had already pounced on him, and could only feebly struggle as he tried to stay awake. Now, the villain said softly in a mock-soothing voice. That won't do at all. Just relax and hold still, and it'll all be over soon. Izuku was slowly starting to lose consciousness the longer he struggled to breath. Gold experience, Izuku thought, as he continued to struggle, despite the villain severely blocking his respiratory system. The villain laughed as he felt the boy's frantic movements start to slow down, a sign that he was starting to lose consciousness. Looks like he's already given up, he thought, chuckling darkly. Well, now I can just, WRYYYAHHH. Shouted a voice only heard by Izuku, who was struggling to stay awake. The villain turned to where he was being repeatedly punched, but found no one there. Then what's hitting me? Before long, the invisible figure let out one final punch, before ceasing its attack. In truth, however, it did little to nothing, as the sludge villain's form was, well, sludge, meaning the consecutive punches didn't do anything to hurt him. But that didn't mean Gold Experience's attack didn't do anything. It just didn't do what Izuku needed it to. Hey, it looks like he's finally given up, the villain said to himself, as he felt that Izuku's movements had slowed down to a stop. As he continued in his attempt to take over the boy's body, he felt something hit his back, and he turned around in annoyance to see who it was. Oh, shit, he said to no one in particular. It's okay now, young man, All Might boomed, though Izuku was barely able to comprehend the voice. Why? Because I am here. The villain had started panicking at the sight of All Might having finally caught up to him, and in his fear, tried to send out a punch. But it wasn't the sight of it being easily dodged that confused the villain. No, what confused him, was the sight of All Might slowly moving up to him, as he reared his fist back for a punch. When All Might had woken him up some time later and proceeded to thank him for helping with the villain, Izuku couldn't believe what was happening. Last he remembered, he was fighting for his life from a villain, but there was nothing he could do, until the number 1 hero saved him. He thanked the man profusely for writing an autograph in his notebook when he was frantically looking for something for him to sign. But Izuku, for the life of him, wasn't sure what made him latch onto All Might when he jumped away, but he knew he wasn't going to let go. Not at this altitude. Young man, I appreciate your enthusiasm as a fan, he yelled out. But this is too much. Izuku continued to hold on for dear life as he and All Might soared through the sky. If I let go, then I'll fall to my death. That's a good point, the hero conceded, before he looked back in front of him, and searched for a place to land. Once they landed on the top of a building, Izuku tried calming himself down from the adrenaline rush of the previous event. Well, it was nice meeting you, young man, All Might began, turning around to walk away. But I really need to get going now. As he was about to jump away, a cloud of smoke instantly formed around him, and before long, it dissipated to reveal a skeletal and very gaunt man in place of the hero. Izuku screamed at the sight. The man grimaced at the noise, and when Izuku finally calmed down, began to explain that yes, he was All Might, and the muscular build he previously had was a different form that was similar to flexing a muscle. He then proceeded to explain the circumstances that had caused his injury, and of how he could only be a pro hero for only 3 hours a day. Once he finished, Izuku was left in shock at the fact that the #1 hero wasn't as invincible as everyone made him out to be. By the way, the man, no, he was still All Might, said. I'd appreciate it if you didn't tell anyone about this. There's no telling what would happen if word got out about my injury. I know that villain activity would skyrocket for sure. Oh, of course, Izuku promised. But, I just have a question, All Might. All Might stared at the boy for a few moments before he spoke. All right, shoot, he replied. Izuku nodded. Since you're the #1 hero and all, do you ever think about what would have happened if you became a villain? At his quizzical expression, he explained why he had thought of it. Because you're so powerful and all. All Might sighed and looked up at the sky. All the time, kid, he replied. All the time. With power like mine, I couldn't just rule out the possibility of forcing everyone to fear me so they wouldn't commit crimes with their quirks. He looked down and made a fist. But after what I've seen and what I've been through, I knew that I had to do everything I could not to start using my quirk for evil purposes. It's why I always wear a smile on my face when I'm in my muscle form, so that the people don't become scared of me. He looked back up at Izuku. By the way, aren't you a bit young to be asking these types of questions? Izuku nervously laughed. Well, it's just, he began, scratching the back of his head. It's just my friend, Bakugo Katsuki, has a quirk called Explosion, and it's really powerful, so I was thinking how bad it would be if he turned into a villain. Not to mention all of the top heroes with their quirks, too. Ah, said All Might, as he nodded in understanding. It helps to be wary at times when a lot of heroes could easily topple society as we know it. But you shouldn't be so pessimistic. It's why we have quirk restrictions and hero programs, so that it doesn't come to that. It's also why there are still police officers. They may not have the influence hero agencies do, but they still do what they can to make a difference. I see, Izuku said, before bowing to the man. Thank you, All Might. You're welcome, he replied. It's very rare that I get to have these type of talks with someone who isn't a close friend or a colleague. Now if you don't mind, he started walking towards the stairs. I'm gonna get going now. It was nice meeting you. What's your name? Midoriya Izuku, sir. The boy replied. All Might nodded. It was nice meeting you, young Midoriya. I look forward to seeing you grow as a hero. He turned back around and started walking down the stairs, leaving Izuku to his thoughts, as he pondered what the hero had told him. After a few minutes, he came to a realization. Ah crap, I forgot to tell him I could heal him. Izuku blamed himself for what was currently happening to Katsuki right now. While villain attacks happened almost on the daily, he knew for a fact that this particular one was his own fault. Watching his best friend struggle against the sludge villain, just as he himself had done just recently, Izuku was overcome with shock and regret. Why did I grab onto All Might? He thought as he watched the chaos. Because of him, the soda bottle that housed the villain must have been dropped while he and All Might were sailing through the air. But as he watched Katsuki look towards the heroes and the crowd of onlookers, fighting for his life as he was slowly being suffocated, Izuku moved. Kachan! He cried out, pushing past the crowd and making a run for it. Before he could get far, however, he was restrained by a man grabbing his arm and backpack. Kid, what the hell do you think you're doing? Demanded the man who was restraining him. Izuku turned around and would have fanboyed at the sight of Death Arms talking to him, but there were more urgent things to worry about. That's my friend, he replied. I gotta help him. Death Arms maintained his iron grip on Izuku. Kid, he said again, but softer. What makes you think you can stop that villain if the pros here can't? He started to lightly drag Izuku back to the crowd. There's nothing else we can do but wait for a better suited pro to handle this. But All Might could. Izuku began. He could. Yeah, well All Might's not here, is he? The hero retorted, which caused Izuku to pause in his resisting. Because he's out of time. All Might's out of time today. He looked back to Katsuki, who was still struggling within the clutches of the sludge villain, and was now getting smaller and smaller as death arms continued to drag him back to the crowd. And Kachan's running out of time. It didn't matter that there wasn't a suitable hero that could help. Every second that passed was one more that led to his potential death. All because of him. At the front of the crowd, Izuku turned to the hero. Death arms, he addressed him. When he turned to look at him, Izuku continued. I'm really sorry, but I don't have time for this. Before the hero could ask him just what he was going to do now, Izuku summoned gold experience and commanded it to lightly punch him on his exposed midsection. And then he ran back to the villain, much to everyone's shock. Hey, what are you doing? Someone shouted. Whether that was a bystander or one of the heroes, Izuku couldn't tell. All that mattered was getting to his friend. His heart unwavering, Izuku kept gold experience in his line of sight as he shrugged off his backpack and immediately threw it at the sludge villain. With the sound of reversing musical notes, all of the pencils and pens inside were then transformed into a collection of bees and wasps, which he commanded to attack what he assumed was the villain's only weak point. His eyes. The sludge villain was fully aware of Izuku running towards him, but he was too preoccupied in trying to gain control of the brat with the explosion quirk. You again, he muttered, wondering how he'd try to save his friend. After all, the only reason he was saved was because of All Might having caught up to him and the villain, but it didn't look like he was anywhere nearby. He opened his mouth to let out a taunt, but was immediately met head-on with a backpack, reflexively closing his eyes in pain as a book's corner nearly made contact with them. When he opened his eyes to begin a retaliation, the villain had only a second to comprehend the fate Izuku had left him to, before being overwhelmed by unimaginable pain at the sensation of multiple stingers making contact with his eyes and injecting their venom. Izuku grimaced at the shrieks of pain the villain was making as he reached Katsuki, and briefly wondered if the decision he just made was the right one. A moment later, he discarded the thought at the sight of Katsuki's still being trapped. Deku, his friend began in between deep breaths. What the hell are you doing? Izuku looked his friend in the eyes and saw that they were pleading for help. While Katsuki usually considered himself an alpha male who could do everything on his own, what was currently happening wasn't a usual circumstance. I've got you, Kachan, he simply stated, looking for a way to reach in and try to pull Katsuki out. At first, the only opening Izuku could find was Katsuki's exposed head, but the sludge villain's grip slowly lessened and lessened, as he was focusing more on trying to relieve the pain from the copious amount of venom assaulting his eyes. Seeing the barest hint of Katsuki's shoulders and upper biceps, Izuku commanded gold experience to grab hold of his armpits and pull him out. After a brief moment of hard tugging, Katsuki was eventually pulled free from the sludge villain's grasp, and was shakily standing up from the ground after unceremoniously tumbling out. Izuku breathed out a sigh of relief at seeing his friend safe, before turning to look at the villain. What do you say we finish the job, Kachan? He asked him. Katsuki let out a low growl and cracked his knuckles. Sure, he replied, then bared his teeth. Let's get this fucker. However, before the two boys could move and proceed to give the villain the beatdown of his life, they were stopped by two very large hands resting on their shoulders. They both turned around in mild annoyance, Katsuki more so, but were shocked to see a very familiar blonde hero wearing a wide grin. I'll take it from here, you two, All Might said, trademark grin in place. It's best you leave this to the professionals. After a moment of silent contemplation, the two boys relented, still in awe at seeing All Might at the scene. Taking a step forward, the hero began to walk towards the villain, before breaking out into a rush. Detroit, he began, rearing his fist back, then throwing it forward. SMAAASH. After the situation had been resolved and the sludge villain subsequently arrested, the heroes who sat on the sidelines began to reprimand Izuku on his earlier choice to run after Katsuki. Death Arms was specifically not happy, especially how Izuku had managed to stun him using gold experience. After he all but shouted how Izuku could have gotten himself killed, it took everything he had to fight down the urge to snap back a retort, as he didn't want to disrespect the hero. Death Arms continued to reprimand how rash his actions were, specifically how he handled the villain. Eventually, he ended up calming down enough for Izuku to point out how no one had moved to even try to save Katsuki. Well, that was pretty eventful, huh, Kachan? Asked Izuku, when the two boys were finally able to break free from the heroes and press, and were now on their way home. Katsuki only grunted in reply. They continued to walk in a tense silence for a few moments until he decided to speak up. Deku. I could have beat his ass fine without you, he said, looking down and gritting his teeth. But thanks, I guess. He looked back up and jabbed a finger towards Izuku. But next time I'm saving you, got it? Izuku smiled. Of course, Kachan, he replied. The matter settled, two boys continued to walk until eventually parting ways for their respective homes. Man, I sure am hungry right about now, he thought. After such an eventful day, all he wanted to do was relax in his bed and eat a filling meal. Preferably a bowl of katsudon. Or maybe two. Young Midoriya. Izuku looked up as his thoughts were interrupted at the sight of the massive hero. All Might. All Might proceeded to attempt to flex a pose, but almost instantly deflated back into his skeletal form. I have to commend you, my boy, he began. Few were willing to take the initiative like you had to save your friend back there. Izuku scratched the back of his head. Oh, thank you, All Might, he replied, unused to the praise. However, All Might continued, his tone turning serious. The way you went about it was unbefitting of how a hero should act. Not this again, Izuku thought. I know, he replied. But I couldn't think of anything else to do at the time. The other heroes just stayed back with the crowd, while He looked down at his shoes, clenching his fists. While my best friend was slowly suffocating to death. I didn't have the time to just wait around, and it was my fault the villain got away in the first place. He looked back up at All Might with a look of mild defiance, as if daring him to reprimand him further, but the man just sighed. I'd say I was the one more at fault, he began, to Izuku's surprise. If you recall earlier today when you latched onto my leg, you were holding onto the left leg, while the villain was housed in my right pocket, he continued, patting the pocket mentioned. While your decision to permanently render the villain blind is questionable at best, you were still the only one who made the attempt to rescue your friend. Thank you, was all Izuku could say. Which is why I would like for you to be my successor. Okay, you clearly don't believe me, but just hear me out. Izuku asked weakly. To say that what Toshinori had just revealed was a bombshell had to be the biggest understatement of the century. He could only imagine what the boy's thoughts were. He could be thinking, All Might's quirk could be passed on. How does that even work? And, how come no one had ever heard of it before, to name a few. All perfectly reasonable thoughts. Oh wait, never mind, it seems Midoriya had been muttering them out loud. I understand this is a lot for you to take in, Toshinori eventually spoke up. And I don't expect an answer right away. But I would just like for you to think about it. It really was a lot of pressure for the number one hero to ask someone to take his quirk and eventually replace him as the symbol of peace. The kid took a deep breath before looking Toshinori in the eyes. I'm sorry, All Might, I can't accept your offer. Oh, he replied awkwardly. Okay, to be honest he really wasn't expecting that. May I ask as to why you've declined? Damn it, just when he thought he had found a good candidate for One for All, he surprisingly ends up turned down. Well, now at least he could check out that Tagata Kid Night Eye's bin. Because I can heal you. Toshinori blinked. Come again. You want to pass your power on because of your injury, right? I can just heal your wound and restore all of your missing organs. Midoriya said. No, I heard you the first time, Toshinori quickly amended. But I would like for you to elaborate. Midoriya nodded and took a deep breath. My quirk, Life Giver, allows me to make plants and animals out of inanimate objects, and that includes all their organs, too. So all I would need is an object similar in size and some of your DNA, and then we can just book you a surgery at the hospital. Toshinori really didn't want to get his hopes up, but this felt too good to be true. Healing quirks were extremely rare, with Recovery Girl regularly having to travel extensively in order to heal injuries from incidents like villain attacks and natural disasters. Could Toshinori be blamed for taking Midoriya's words with a grain of salt? If his organs were restored, then he would no longer have to rely on a 3-hour time limit. He began. Could you show me? Midoriya nodded and took off his backpack, and proceeded to rummage through it for a suitable item to transform. He then stood up and was holding what Toshinori assumed was an eraser in his hands. After a brief moment of staring at it in concentration, a sound that he could only immediately attribute to music faintly played, before Midoriya walked forward. In his hands was a tiny heart, in place of the eraser. To say that Toshinori was impressed had to be an even bigger understatement than the one-for-all reveal, but before he could tell the boy how impressed he was, he noticed that the heart had been beating. "That's incredible," he breathed out. "Young Midoriya, I don't know what to say. Do you know how exceedingly rare your quirk is?" The boy grinned. "Yup," he replied. "I found out I could do this when I was experimenting with my friend Bakugo to see whether or not I could create humans, but it turned out my limit was at small animals. Never said I couldn't make organs, though." Toshinori nodded in understanding. The human body was a very complex system, and it would have to take many years of research in order to create an organism that could properly function, let alone go through the stages of life. And that wasn't even including all of the ethical implications. "Does the local hospital know about this?" "Of course," the boy replied. "One of the first things I asked my mother to do after I found out was to drive me to the hospital, and I've been donating organs regularly ever since." Well, that was good at least, all the more reason for him to be the perfect successor for, oh. Wait, that's right, he refused. Damn it, he thought. Now he really wanted to try and convince the boy to change his mind. And introduce him to Chiyo Obasan. "This was how you handled the villain," he said softly. "Wasn't it?" "Yes," Midoriya admitted. "I used my quirk to turn my school supplies into a bunch of bees and wasps that I directed to attack his eyes. I didn't care about the consequences because I knew I could fix his eyes immediately after." Yikes, Toshinori thought, wincing. He had had his fair share of painful stings, of course, but it was only ever once at a time. But more than that, and concentrated on the eyes, no less. He briefly noted to make a reminder not to do anything to make Izuku Midoriya angry. "Midoriya, my boy," Toshinori continued. "I don't know if it would work for me, considering the nature of One for All, but I would like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for this opportunity." He didn't want to get his hopes up, but he really wanted to be able to eat more and take larger breaths. Not to mention the 3-hour time limit. But we haven't even gotten to the punch ghost yet. Now it was Toshinori's turn to be confused. Toshinori nervously twiddled his thumbs as he sat, waiting for his surgery at Musudafu General Hospital. He had initially wanted to postpone the surgery so that he could think about Midoriya's offer. When he consulted Chiyo and Sorahiko on the matter, the former recommended he have it as soon as possible, while the latter suggested waiting a bit, because it was unknown if the new organs could handle One for All. In the end, Toshinori decided that it was worth the risk. He really wanted to be able to breathe more again. "Yagi-san." Toshinori stood up at the sound of his name. "Yes, that would be me." The nurse who had called for him smiled. "Perfect. Now if you will just come with me, we'll get you all set up in a room." Wordlessly, the man followed her as they walked through the halls of the hospital, until he decided to speak up. "To be honest," he began, trying to make conversation. "I thought this was too good to be true." The woman lightly laughed in response. "Practically everyone thinks of that at first," she said. "But it's been years since Izuku-kun started donating here, and we haven't had any complications at all. It's because each organ is made using someone's DNA, which means there's no need for any medication, since the immune system immediately accepts it." "I see," Toshinori replied. "He truly is a remarkable young man." Another minute passed where the two continued to walk in silence, until they reached a door. Opening it, the nurse led him into a room, telling him that it was where he would be staying after the surgery. He repeated the words that Midoriya had spoken. "Punch, ghost." The boy nodded and gestured to his side. "This is gold experience," he stated. Before Toshinori could ask what a gold experience was, he felt something poke his shoulder. Blinking, he realized that there was no way Midoriya could have been the one to do it, as his arm hadn't moved at all to reach towards him. "Is gold experience an invisible companion of yours?" he asked tentatively. "Not exactly," the boy replied. "For some reason, I'm the only one who's able to see him." Toshinori found that very odd, but chalked it up as an uncommon sort of quirk mutation. I can summon and command him to do things, and through him, give objects life using Life Giver. Although, he started running around Toshinori at a surprising amount of speed, before stopping in front of him. He doesn't seem to be sentient. He's basically like an extension of myself, for the most part. Toshinori raised an eyebrow. For the most part. Well, some things are autonomous with gold experience, Midoriya replied. Like how he'll immediately try to block and counterattack if someone tries to sneak up on me. And since no one can see him, he picked up a rock that began to float unsuspended in midair, almost like telekinesis. That's why I call him a punch ghost. I see, Toshinori said, before pulling out his phone. You plan on going to UA, correct? Midoriya nodded. Well, that settles it, then. Why don't we exchange contact information, and we can come up with a good day so I can start training you for the entrance exams. He briefly cracked a smile at seeing the boy's expression. And I suppose you'd want to bring young Bakugo along with you. Yes, of course. Midoriya replied excitedly, bringing out his own phone. Toshinori slowly opened his eyes to see a figure beside him. When his vision cleared and his brain had caught up to speed, he recognized who it was that was sitting in the chair. Midoriya-kun, he began. The boy woke up from having dozed off, and was now looking at Toshinori with anticipation. How are you feeling, Yagi-san? The boy asked. Toshinori stayed silent for a moment, taking a brief moment to take a deep breath, but then took a much larger one when he realized that he could breathe more air in, feeling elated that he could do so. Better than I have in more than 5 years, he replied. It's as if I was never injured in the first place. Izuku just chuckled and rubbed the back of his head. Well, the organs having your DNA made up the most of it, so your body won't ever reject it, he explained. And then I just had gold experience instantly heal the stitches, so you won't have to sit in the hospital for weeks. So you should be good to go now. Toshinori nodded. I see, he said, noting the lack of life support equipment that he had previously needed when his lung and stomach had been removed during his final battle with All For One. And speaking of stomachs, he just felt his growl, causing him to softly chuckle. It was a sensation he had long since forgotten, but he welcomed it with open arms. He made a mental reminder to get some fast food on the way home. And a lot this time. He draped his legs over the bed, before moving to stand up. I'm going to try something now. Izuku's eyes widened as he realized what Toshinori was about to do. Wait, Yagi-san, you only just got, he said, trying to move to stop him, but Toshinori had already activated One For All, causing his skeletal body to inflate to that of his body as All Might, the physique that he used to have before his injury. And then he waited. 1 second became 2, which then became 3, and so on and so forth, as Toshinori anticipated the inevitable rupture of his new organs from One For All coursing through them, until he was sure that it wasn't the case, taking deep breaths the whole time. He smiled at Izuku. It seems that it worked, Midoriya-kun, he told him, before deflating and moving to envelop the boy in a hug. Thank you, he said. You don't know how much this means to me. Izuku just nodded silently, awkwardly patting Toshinori on the back. It's no problem, Yagi-san, he replied. Toshinori pulled back as he began to deflate back into his skeletal form, but he knew for a fact that it would only end up being temporary. Thanks to the young boy in front of him, he could remain a hero for even longer, until the time came for him to finally pass on One For All. But it seemed that was still several years off. I'd still love to train you for the entrance exams, he continued. If you want me to, that is. Izuku nodded fervently. Of course, he said excitedly, I'd love to. Perfect, he replied. Now, what say you meet me at Takoba Municipal Beach Park in, let's say, a few weeks. I'll text you the day and time. TCH. Katsuki looked around at the massive piles of garbage that littered the beach with what looked to be disdain, before looking back at Toshinori, eyeing him with suspicion. So you're Deku's new trainer? Toshinori raised an eyebrow as the boy addressed him. I am, he replied. Midoriya-kun helped me out of a tight spot a few weeks ago, so I offered to help him train his body and his quirk for the UA entrance exams, and the offer goes to you as well, should you accept it. From what he heard about the boy from Izuku, there was a very low chance he would end up rejecting the chance to train, especially when the exams were less than a year away. Katsuki grunted as he motioned Izuku to follow him to a spot several feet away. You know, he said, meaning to be quiet, but Toshinori was still quite skilled enough to pick up the conversation, albeit just barely. When you said someone offered to train us, I thought you meant a pro or someone cool was gonna train us, not this stick-looking guy. Okay, he didn't know whether or not he should feel insulted by that, but the boy didn't have to say it like that. Sure, Toshinori looked sickly in his unmuscled form, but he didn't think he looked that bad. It would seem the boy needed more convincing. On the contrary, young Bakugo, he interjected, forcing One for All to course through his body and causing both boys to slightly flinch at his booming voice. Turning around, the two stared at the hulking figure of his muscle form, surprising Izuku and shocking Katsuki. I'd say I'm more than qualified to train you. What the? Katsuki trailed off as he stared at the man, before turning to Izuku and lightly whacking him on the arm. Did you know? Yeah, he replied, scratching the back of his head. Then why the hell didn't you say All Might was gonna be training us? Well, I didn't think he'd show you right away. What do you mean you think he wouldn't show me? Toshinori awkwardly watched the two argue back and forth for another minute, wondering if this was how their friendship functioned. He raised a hand to his mouth. Ahem. This caused the two boys to cease their arguing and remember that there was a third person with them, and that person being the number one hero. Izuku's reaction was considerably tame, due to his previous interactions with Toshinori, as he was now sheepishly looking at him. Katsuki's, however, tried to appear stoic as he crossed his arms, but he could see that the boy was radiating excitement. So what's your story, All Might? The latter asked. And why are you so skinny? Toshinori then briefly explained how he received his injury, and how there was a time limit on how long he could use his muscle form. But thanks to young Midoriya and his wonderful ability to create organs, I can now use this form indefinitely. He then deflated. All right, Katsuki replied, before taking a look around him. So I guess you want us to clean up this beach. Toshinori nodded. Yes. By clearing everything out without the use of your quirks, your bodies will grow in strength, as you will be pushing yourselves trying to carry very heavy pieces of discarded equipment. I originally wanted you to get it done by the entrance exams, but seeing as how there's two of you, you'll more than likely get it done within half that time. So I propose, he brought out a sheet of paper, which then unfolded into several more, connected by pieces of tape. This. My aim to pass, American Dream Plan. Along with cleaning up the beach, I'll have you both regularly sparring and training your quirks. He folded the papers back up. Of course, I have no doubt that you could easily get into the hero course as you are now, but it never hurt to always strive to go beyond. He inflated into his muscle form once again to shout a brief, plus ultra. Before immediately deflating. Now, he continued, looking back at the two boys. Let's get started, shall we? Mista. A boy wearing a black tank top shouted, running towards a man wearing red and blue. All of a sudden, a pink mass of flesh jumped up towards a small model airplane that had been shooting at it, crushing one of its wings and causing blood to squirt out of the boy's arm and mouth. Trish. A voice shouted behind him. Izuku turned to see a man wearing a white suit shouting at a girl next to him. Hurry. You need to get inside the closet and lock the door. The girl turned around and began to quickly run towards the back of the plane, somehow causing the pink mass to cease its attack on the airplane, and was now quickly crawling towards her at an astonishing speed. What the hell? The man in the suit shouted, as a strange white and blue being appeared in front him, and moved to shoot out its arm in a vain attempt to distract it, but the action went ignored, as the mass kept moving at a rapid pace that was quickly increasing. Trish, hurry and close the door. As she was about to reach for the door, the girl suddenly stopped as she noticed the pink blob quickly moving in her direction, and then suddenly leaping for her. I'm not fast enough. Trish. Muda 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 muda. Izuku's eyes shot open as the sound of his phone ringing blasted his ears. Groaning softly, he rolled over and reached for his desk to grab the offending device. Squinting at the caller's name, he accepted the call and placed the phone to his ear. Hello? He asked groggily. Oi, nerd, began Katsuki. I'm on my. Wait, did you just wake up? He nearly shouted, causing Izuku to wince and hold the phone away from his ear. The exams are today, Deku. How the hell did you forget that? Izuku immediately sat up at what he had just been told, and was starting to panic as he looked over at his calendar, which had a particular day circled multiple times, and an arrow labeled, entrance exams. Which were today. Look, I don't care, Katsuki continued. I'll be there in 5 minutes, and you better be ready by then. The boy then hung up, prompting Izuku to nearly jump out of his bed and made a mad dash towards the bathroom. After hastily getting into his slightly wrinkled school uniform and stuffing his running clothes in his backpack, the doorbell ringed, to which his mother answered the door. Oh, good morning, Katsuki. Inko greeted, hugging him. The boy just grunted as he pulled back and stuffed his hands in his pockets. Hey, Auntie, he greeted in return. Is Deku ready? 'Cause I'm about to leave without him if he isn't. Yeah, I'm here, Kachan. Izuku called out, as he rushed to put his shoes on. Taking a quick look at the contents of his backpack, he was relieved that he had everything he needed. Quickly walking for the door, he briefly hugged his mother goodbye. Love you, Mom. Inko tightly hugged her son back. Love you, too, sweetie. As she watched the two boys walk away, she cupped her hands to her mouth. Good luck on the exams, you two. Seriously, Katsuki began, when he and Izuku were almost at the apartment complex's gates. How do you forget it was today? I really don't know, Izuku admitted. I guess I must have been really tired last night. We finished clearing the beach 2 weeks ago. And we were sparring 2 nights ago. Well, it's not my fault you let Gold Experience do all the work for you half the time. Whatever, let's hope we can get to the station before it gets crowded. Hello, listeners. A voice shouted from the stage. Izuku was awed to see that it was Present Mike manning the orientation for the practical exams. Wow, it's Present Mike, the voice hero. Oi, be quiet, Katsuki quietly reprimanded. You're being loud. Izuku then realized that he had said his thoughts out loud, so he sheepishly nodded at him and tried to keep quiet. Except his excitement at seeing Present Mike, coupled with his extreme habit of muttering when he was thinking seriously, caused the other students around him to stare. Present Mike then continued to explain how because there were so many applicants, there needed to be more than one testing area, which could be found on the ticket they received in the mail when they registered. Izuku noted that he was in Battle Center B, while Katsuki was in Battle Center A. I guess they don't want friends helping each other out, huh? Katsuki quietly remarked. Yeah, Izuku replied. It looks like we'll be in different areas. Excuse me. A voice interjected. Izuku turned to see a boy had stood up and raised his hand. I have something to say. Present Mike gave a thumbs up towards the boy. All right, go ahead. The boy cleared his throat as he flipped through his orientation booklet. It says here that there are 4 villains that we must face in the practical, but you have only gone through 3. If this is a mistake, then UA is the highest esteemed hero school in the country should be ashamed of themselves. And you, with the curly hair. Izuku briefly noted how the boy had glasses, before realizing that he was pointing in his general direction. Looking around to see exactly who he was pointing at, he realized it was him the boy was talking about, before pointing a finger to himself. You have been incessantly muttering this entire time. If you are only here to mess about, then you should just leave. Izuku quickly covered his mouth in embarrassment. Sorry. And what the hell are you doing? Katsuki yelled out a retort. You're making even more noise by just yelling. The boy with the glasses then turned his sights on him with a glare, to which Katsuki just sneered back, as if daring him to continue. Well, you see, Present Mike finally said, intervening before the situation could get worse. The 4th villain you've mentioned is worth 0 villain points, meaning that there's no reason to take them down. I see, the boy with the glasses said, before bowing and sitting back down. Please excuse my interruption. Thanks, Kachan, Izuku whispered, when Present Mike continued the orientation. Katsuki just rolled his eyes. Again, I say, Deku, he whispered back. You need to stand up for yourself. Present Mike then continued the orientation, up to the end. With a brief explanation of the school motto and a cry of, plus ultra, he bowed and left the stage, followed by the lights coming back on. All of the students were talking among themselves as they filed out of the auditorium, but both Izuku and Katsuki were both silent as they walked down the stairs. Izuku was trying to come up with a plan for how he would use gold experience to dispatch the mock villains and therefore gain points, while Katsuki was simply resigned to just blasting them all away, and was instead thinking of where to get food once the exams finished. Well, good luck, Kachan. Izuku spoke up, when it was time for them to part ways towards their respective testing grounds. You, too, Deku, Katsuki replied, as he returned the fist the boy had held up, and turned around to walk away. The training he and Katsuki received from All Might over the previous 10 months had been pretty strenuous. In truth, they didn't actually need it, per se, but neither of them were about to turn down training from All Might of all people. Each week had been divided up with days that were spent clearing the beach of all of the discarded junk, and days that were spent sparring with each other to improve their quirk usage. While Gold Experience would never have the raw power Explosion did, it made up for it in sheer versatility. When it came to its ability to give living things extra life, it almost always guaranteed a win when sparring Katsuki, but Toshinori advised that he not rely on it as a crutch, as there was always a possibility that it would actually have the opposite effect on someone or something, and also Katsuki was getting tired of being stunned every time he tried to get in close for a hit. Oh hey, it's that girl who kept me from tripping, Izuku suddenly thought as he spotted her in the crowd, breaking him away from his previous musing. Before he could make his way towards the girl and thank her for helping him out, a hand was placed on his shoulder, firmly keeping him planted where he stood. You again, muttered a voice behind him. Izuku turned around to see who was accosting him, but slightly froze at the sight of the boy who had attempted to call him out on his loud muttering during the orientation. What are you trying to do? Before Izuku could answer his question, he looked at the direction towards the girl he was looking at. It's bad enough that you were being distracting during the orientation, he began. But now you're looking to disrupt other students' chances of getting in. Shame on you. There is no place here for such a delinquent like you. Wait, Izuku said, trying to defuse the misunderstanding. I wasn't trying to. Okay, start. A voice yelled out, causing the two boys to slightly jump. Looking up, they could see Present Mike looking down at the entire crowd with his arms stretched out in a grandiose expression. Well, he yelled out again. What are you waiting for? You're not getting into UA by just standing around, so get moving. Heroes don't wait for countdowns, you know. It was when he finished, that everyone had realized that the practical exam had already begun, so now the entire crowd was making a mad dash for the large doorway to the battle center, with Izuku getting caught up in the very back, having no way to try and get ahead of the large congregation of students. Until he remembered what his quirk was. Imbuing his legs with gold experiences, Izuku gained a tremendous burst in speed, getting ahead of many of the other students, and was now right in front of the large doorway. Running through it without hesitation, he began looking around for the point-marked robots, before one suddenly appeared in front of him. Reacting quickly, he slid under the robot's legs in order to avoid colliding with it head-on. Briefly noting the large number 2 printed on one of its arms, he commanded Gold Experience to jump out in front of him and start attacking the robot. Muda 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 muda. The golden being cried out, as it pummeled the 2-pointer in a barrage of fists. However, he saw that it was taking too long for the robot to start caving in, due to the limited range it could stand in front of him. Changing his attack, Izuku then commanded that it use Life Giver on the robot. Almost immediately, large vines began sprouting from its torso in all directions, until its head burst open, causing it to topple over. 2 points, he quietly said to himself. Taking a moment to regain his composure, Izuku moved to look for more robots to gain points from. Almost immediately, however, he heard a loud, artificial voice boom behind him, causing him to stop in his tracks. Target spotted. Izuku whipped around in surprise, and recognizing the large number 1 painted on its arm, clenched his fist and yelled out a war cry as he rushed towards it. Gold Experience. Elsewhere, the various teachers and faculty of UA High School all sat in their respective chairs, watching the examinees with careful eyes. Some of them showed visible excitement at seeing the students' performances, while others mostly watched with indifference. It looks like we'll be having quite the number of talented students coming in this year, began Sekijiro, the pro-hero Vlad King and the homeroom teacher of Class 1B, who looked to his side towards a man wearing a bored and tired expression on his face. Do you have any guesses as to who you'll be getting, Aizawa-san? Eraserhead shrugged. I don't really care who gets who, so long as I don't get another problem class this time around. Well, we know that he'll get somewhere pretty high, interjected the voice beside him, and Shota turned to look at a woman who was pointing at the large screen in front of her. I mean, just look at that quirk. And those delicious abs of his, too. Kayama, no, Shota reprimanded. The woman known as Nimari Kayama, hero named Midnight, dramatically pouted. Well, you're no fun, she said. But you can't exactly blame me, can you? And besides, she leaned in close to him, until her face was just inches away from his ear. Shota's left eye twitched at the movement. No, I prefer older males. God damn it, Kayama, Shota sighed, rubbing his eyes. His colleague, however, just quietly cackled in response. He hated her constant attempts at flirting, but he respected her too much as a hero and as a friend to actually do something about it. Even if it did annoy him every time she did it. Sekijiro looked at the two in amusement at their antics, well used to the dynamic their friendship functioned on. Yes, that's how you do it, my boy. Shouted another voice, and the teachers turned to see the skeletal form of All Might pointing to a screen that displayed a boy charging towards a one-pointer, and then, just standing there. While the lower half of the robot caved in. Repeatedly. Whoa, is that telekinesis? Nimari began, slightly amazed at what she was seeing, before she realized what the man had said. And what do you mean, my boy? Oh, it's nothing, Kayama-san, Toshinori replied, quickly realizing the consequence of his outburst. Forget I said anything. Nimari was unconvinced. What, is he your secret kid or something? She asked, wiggling her eyebrows. What? Toshinori sputtered out in shock. Of course not. How would I have the time to have any children and raise them, when I was too busy being a hero? Before the two could continue, they were interrupted by someone clearing their throat. Interesting as your conversation may be, began Ken Ishiyama, better known as Mentos. I suggest that you focus on evaluating the student examinees, he continued sternly. That's why we're here, after all. Toshinori stayed silent for a moment before responding. You're right. My apologies, Ishiyama-san. The matter settled, the teachers went back to spectating the students, with some maintaining their attention on the young boy casually defeating the robots while simply standing there. Nimari whistled as she saw him rip the head off of a one-pointer, before doing a double take as she saw vines begin to sprout out of a three-pointer. Wait, what's that? She asked rather loudly. I thought his quirk was just telekinesis. Yagi-kun, what's his quirk? Toshinori remained tight-lipped, oddly enough. Meanwhile, Principal Nezu stared at the screen in deep thought, as he searched his mind for the answer. Could it be? He muttered. He had a fleeting suspicion on what the green-haired boy's quirk actually was, but he wasn't entirely sure. It seemed that he would need to make a phone call after the exam. But first, he thought, a slight smile tugging at his lips. It's time to see how they'll handle the real challenge. Throughout the next 7 minutes, Izuku had managed to rack up quite a substantial amount of points, as he ran around trying to find and destroy as many robots as he could, which about 40, if he could recall correctly. He had a good feeling that 40 points would have been enough for him to pass, but training with Toshinori and Katsuki for 10 months had instilled the importance of always striving to go beyond, and a memory of Toshinori flexing and yelling plus ultra. Or in Katsuki's words, half-assing will never get you anywhere. The ground began to rumble violently, causing him and all of the other participants to stop what they were doing and look around for the source of the quake. However, a large shadow soon covered the ground, and they all turned towards the direction it came from. They could only stare at the sight of a gargantuan robot ominously wheeling towards them. It looks like the zero-pointer had arrived. Overcome with fear, the participants started scrambling in the opposite direction, desperate to get away from the monstrous beast. Izuku stared at the zero-pointer for a moment to ponder whether or not gold experience could stop it, before turning around and breaking out into a run. Nope. Help. Please. Izuku immediately stopped in his tracks when he heard the cry, and turned back around to see someone pinned underneath some large debris. Upon having a closer look, he then realized that it was the girl who had kept him from falling, back at UA's entrance. Oh. Without thinking, Izuku imbued his legs with gold experiences, and broke out into a full sprint towards the girl. Once reaching her, he wasted no time and commanded it to lift the debris up, completely overturning it, before lifting the girl up and carrying her in his arms. With a brief glance towards the titan-sized robot, he quickly summoned the golden being back within him, before running as fast as he could in the other direction. After gaining a good distance away from the robot, He began to slow down to make a turn and gain even more distance away, when he heard a loud voice. "End time is up." The loud voice of Present Mike, along with the blares of a siren, caused the intense rumbling from the zero-pointer to cease as it came to a halt. Momentarily freezing in place, its arm was left outstretched, before retracting back to its side. Ochako sighed in relief, before looking back to the boy who had carried her away. She briefly noted how safe she felt in his arms, before speaking up. You can let me down now." The boy quickly looked back to her. "Oh, sorry about that," he said, before letting her down on her feet. However, when her feet made contact with the ground, she suddenly felt a sharp pain shoot up her leg. "Ow," she hissed, quickly grabbing onto the boy's shoulder for support. "Are you hurt?" he asked in alarm, putting his arm around her waist to also help support her weight. Ochako would have blushed at the physical contact, but the pain overshadowed any current that thought. "I think my ankle's sprained," she told him. He silently nodded as they continued to hold onto each other, before she felt a feeling of warmth travel throughout her leg. Ochako blinked from the sudden sensation, before noting how the throbbing pain had immediately ceased. Tentatively, she rotated her once injured foot around, before fully placing it on the ground. "It's not hurt anymore," she thought in surprise. "Is your ankle okay now?" The boy eventually spoke up, and Ochako realized that he still had an arm around her waist. With a small blush, she pulled away from him. Why a part of her regretted this, she didn't know. Did you heal me?" she asked, taking a few steps in place as she marveled at the thought of her foot suddenly being healed. The boy smiled. "Yup. Wow," Ochako began, her eyebrows raised. Thank you." She quickly enveloped him in a hug. The boy froze at the sudden movement, before awkwardly patting her back. "Why, you're welcome." Ochako then realized what exactly she was doing, and immediately pulled back, a large blush overtaking her face. "Oh my gosh, I just hugged a boy." She briefly noticed how said boy was also blushing, but his was much larger. The two teenagers continued awkwardly staring at each other for a few more moments, before the boy cleared his throat and held out his hand. "I'm Midoriya Izuku. It's nice to meet you." Ochako smiled and shook it with her own. "Uraraka Ochako. Nice to meet you, too." She wanted to ask how it was he healed her, but before she could say anything further, the soft voice of a woman broke through the mass of students. "Good job, everyone." Ochako turned to see a short, elderly woman walking around and handing something to the other students. "Is anyone hurt?" When the people around her kept shaking their hands and telling her no, she continued to walk around, until turning to Ochako's general direction. Lighting up, she walked over to where she was standing. "Oh, hello, dears," she greeted. Before Ochako could reply, however, the woman turned to Midoriya and continued to speak. "You must be that young man Toshi never shuts up about." Midoriya smiled sheepishly as he gave her a deep bow. "I'm Midoriya Izuku. It's an honor to meet you, recovery girl." The woman chuckled. "Oh hush, you." She reached into the bag she was carrying, and pulled out what looked to be gummy bears. "Have some gummies, you too." Ochako obligingly took some of the offered candies and popped them in her mouth, slightly enjoying the sweet taste. After a moment, she turned to Midoriya and motioned for him to follow her. "Well, I could certainly use your help patching up anyone who has any serious injuries." "Of course," the boy replied, quickly moving to stand beside her. Suddenly, he turned back around and waved to Ochako. "See you later, Uraraka-san. Hopefully we both passed." Ochako slowly waved back as she watched the two figures walk away. "I hope so too. Izuku, is everything all right?" Izuku blinked as he was brought back out of his thoughts by his mother. Oh, sorry about that, Mom," he said, picking up a small bit of rice with his chopsticks. "I was just thinking about something. Is it the entrance exams?" Izuku took a split second to consider his answer. "Yeah," he replied, partially lying. "I was just trying to think about whether or not I got enough points to pass." In the 10 months that they had spent training, neither he nor Katsuki had thought to ask Toshinori what the minimum number of points required to get into the hero course actually were, since the two of them had promised each other to try their absolute hardest to pass. Inko smiled. "Don't worry about it, honey," she said in a comforting tone. "I think you got more than enough to get in the hero course, what with you and Katsuki training and all." "Yeah, that's a good point," he admitted, before going back to eating his dinner. He hated lying to his mother, but as a teenage male, there were just some things that he wasn't willing to share, no matter how close he was with his mother. Like what he was previously thinking about, for example. He had become lost in thought as he stared at his chopsticks, or rather, the color of them. The brown wood of the utensil reminded him of brown hair and a particular hairstyle. Brown hair, kind eyes, pretty face. Izuku sighed. He had had crushes on pretty girls in the past, that was for sure, but he just couldn't seem to get the face of the girl he had rescued out of his head. It was actually starting to keep him up at night, if he had to be honest. And part of him was seriously hoping they would end up in the same class together. He really wanted to see Ochako Uraraka again. Once he had finished eating, Izuku placed his dishes in the sink, and flopped onto the couch to browse the internet for any recent hero news. Raising an eyebrow at reading the title of a rumored romance between Mt. Lady and Kamui Woods, he tapped the link that directed him to the online tabloid. Eyebrows furrowing at the information, he laid there wondering just how the press were still able to get paid writing up such slander, before the frantic sound of his mother's voice rang him out of his thoughts. Izuku. Sitting up, he turned around and looked towards the open front door of the apartment. Yeah, he called out. Inko scrambled to get inside as she shakily held up an envelope that displayed a wax seal with the letters U and a combined to occupy a single space. The letter. It came. Izuku carefully took the envelope from his mother's hands, and quietly retreated to his room. Once settling into his chair, he stared at the envelope for a few moments, before taking a deep breath. Hastily grabbing it with both hands, he pulled at both sides, and eventually tore it open. The small metal disc enclosed within fell to the table with a brief clatter. When it finally settled, a brief beat played, before a hologram emerged, and from it, the face of a familiar man took up the majority of the floating screen. I am here as a projection. All Might. Izuku muttered, eyes wide in surprise as he saw the man who had trained him answering his acceptance letter. Midoriya Izuku, the hero began. Along with passing the written exam, you had also managed to gain a total of 48 villain points in the practical, which means that you've made it into the hero course. Izuku was feeling elated at hearing the news, but before he could cry out in joy, he was interrupted by the man suddenly raising his hand. But before you celebrate, I must continue. He paused for dramatic effect, before continuing. You see, even though you were told to neutralize as many villains as you could, there was actually a hidden factor when it came to the practical. A factor only a select few realized. He motioned towards the screen beside him, and the camera in front of him moved to center the screen, which began playing the footage of a very familiar scene. It was of him rescuing Uraraka from the rubble and the zero-pointer. When the video played up to the part where he had run well enough away from the robot, it paused before the camera filming it moved back to All Might. It was thanks to you that Uraraka Ochako was able to come out of the exam unscathed, and so you have received. He gestured towards the screen again, but instead of camera footage, a scoreboard was instead displayed, with his own name having taken the spot of second place. Rescue points. Izuku saw that along with the number 48 that represented the amount of points he had gained from villain kills, he had also been given a whopping 40 rescue points, which brought his total up to 88 points, just behind Katsuki's own 99 points, 77 villain points and 22 rescue points. After all, All Might continued. What type of hero school would we be if we didn't reward one of the most important qualities of a hero? The hero seemed to be grinning even wider than he already was, and was giving Izuku a thumbs up. Stellar job, young Midoriya. I look forward to seeing you in the hero course, but for now, I bid you welcome to your hero academia. With that, the message came to a close, and the hologram disappeared back into the disc. Izuku couldn't believe what had just happened. Letting out a sigh, he leaned back into his chair and began to slightly laugh, out of mild shock and overwhelming joy at the words his idol and trainer had told him. He had done it. He was going to be a hero. Izuku watched the exchange between Bucciarati and the capo known as Mr. Pericolo with a stoic expression. While he was glad that the man had improved his rank in Passione and would continue to help him in his quest to overthrow the boss, he had to maintain extreme caution when it came to talking about Pulpo or his reasons for wanting to join the mafia. There was just no telling what would happen if the circumstances for the man's death ever came to light. He needed to see his dream and his goals through. For him, and for the man who saved him, all those years ago. While I know you've only just taken over Pulpo's position, Mr. Paraculo began, you will also have to take over any jobs that he had, and there's one that he's left unfinished. Is that all right with you? There was a job he left unfinished. Asked the white-clad man known as Bruno Bucciarati. What is it? It's a direct order from the boss. Izuku sharply inhaled through his nose at the man's words. The others in Bucciarati's team were also surprised at the mention of the elusive head of Passione. The boss that no one's ever met, the boss. And an order that he directly gave out. Indeed, the capo replied. Actually, I'll just tell you right now, you'll be guarding his daughter. This is arguably the most important mission he has ever given anyone, as no one else except myself even knows about it. And now, so have you. Izuku couldn't believe what he was hearing. The boss, the man that he and Bucciarati needed to overthrow to destroy the drug operation, had a daughter. This complicates things. How much, however, he didn't know. Actually, he continued, turning around and motioning towards a young man holding a mop. You'll be guarding her starting right now. Izuku eyed him in confusion, before turning to his side as he came to a realization. Bucciarati, he began. That guy behind Paraculo, that's not a guy at all. That has to be the boss's daughter. Collectively, the entirety of Squadra Guardia del Corpo looked to the now revealed female in shock as she walked up to stand beside the capo. This is Trish Una, he said. And you'll be risking your lives to protect her as you escort her to him. Even sacrificing yourselves, if need be. Pencils and pens. Check. Notebooks. All of them including the hero analysis ones. Snacks in case you get hungry before lunch. Izuku discreetly rolled his eyes from where Inko couldn't see his face. They're in here, too. After checking that he had everything he needed, he zipped up his backpack and proceeded to put it on, before turning to face his mother. It'll be fine, Mom. It's still just the first day of high school. When he looked back up, his mother enveloped him in a warm embrace. I know, she replied. I know I'm kind of overreacting here, but I can't help but be so proud of you. Izuku softly smiled at his mother's excitement. My baby boy's gonna learn how to be a hero. If only your father were here to see this. It was then that his smile turned into a frown, as his face morphed into a sad expression. Yeah, I wish he was here, too. He couldn't remember much of his father, but Inko had told numerous stories of how he had worked overseas to provide for his wife and newborn son, and how he'd always come back with a large smile on his face. But when he had turned 3, Hisashi was one out of many that were killed in a violent villain attack. His body was never found. Before the happy-turned-sour mood of the mother and son could get worse, however, they were interrupted by a knock on the door to their apartment. Inko rubbed her son's back before letting go. I'll get it. That must be Katsuki. Moving across the living room, she opened the door to greet her son's friend. Good morning, Katsuki. Almost immediately after greeting her friend's son, she noticed the person standing semi-awkwardly behind him. Oh, and who's this? A friend of yours. Izuku grew curious at hearing his mother's words, and so walked over to see who it was that his friend had brought him. When he realized who it was, he froze. Hey, Uraraka-san. When she saw the person standing at the door, Ochako visibly lit up as she waved to him. Hi, Midoriya-kun. Izuku tried to maintain his composure as he saw her smile and heard her bright voice, but the truth was, he was really happy to see her. As much as I'd like to ask you how you know this girl, Izuku, Inko interrupted, it's nearing 8 o'clock. You 3 are going to miss the train if you don't get moving. Izuku quickly looked towards the clock on the wall of the living room to confirm what she had said. Oh shoot, you're right. Moving with haste, he put his shoes on and made his way out of the door, before briefly hugging his mother goodbye and rushing out of the door. Katsuki sidestepped out of the way to let his friend pass through, and was about to move to follow him and Ochako towards the complex's entrance, when he was stopped by a hand gripping his arm. Wait, Katsuki. He looked towards Inko with a quizzical expression on his face. What is it? I know he doesn't really need it, she began after taking a deep breath. But please, look out for him, will you? Katsuki's expression softened once he saw how she was overcome with worry. Always, Auntie. Not that he needs it, but, always. She let go of his arm, and he proceeded to make his way towards the other teenagers, who were patiently waiting at the base of the stairs. What took you so long, Kachan? Had to tie my shoes, he lied effortlessly. Izuku nodded in reply and the three teenagers began to walk towards the train station. After several moments of silence passed, Izuku made an attempt to strike up a conversation. So, Uraraka-san, he began. How did you, know where I lived? Ochako rested a finger against her cheek as she thought of her answer. Well, your place is on the way to the station, and I noticed that Bakugo-kun was wearing the boy's uniform, she said. So I thought I'd say hi and that the three of us could walk together. Ah, he replied, nodding slowly. Another silence befell them, as he put his hands in his pockets and was trying to think of something else to say. So what do you think will happen once we get to class? He eventually asked. Ochako repeatedly tilted her head sideways as she thought about how UA would possibly handle the first days of school. Well, there's the entrance ceremony. Katsuki, meanwhile, had settled into pace behind them, and watched the exchange between the two with a calculating look in his eyes. Upon finally reaching UA's entrance, Ochako let out a low whistle as they walked past the massive gate. I still can't believe I actually made it in, she said, admiring the scenery of the school. Cleanly cut trees were spaced out throughout the courtyard, and several buildings the size of skyscrapers loomed over the three students. Yeah, Izuku agreed. It is pretty amazing. Katsuki, however, was busy noticing a detail he had admittedly forgotten to ask All Might about. The view's nice and all, he cut in. But do either of you see a map anywhere? 'Cause I'm fairly sure they didn't give us a map in the acceptance letter. Izuku and Ochako paused when they realized that he was right, but when Izuku was about to suggest they find an upperclassman and ask them, Katsuki was already beginning to walk away. Never mind, he said loudly, I found it. After studying the map that was displayed in front of the buildings, the three students eventually made their way towards the elevator, and towards the direction of the classroom marked 1A. Katsuki craned his neck upwards to see that the door was large enough to have even reached the ceiling. That's a pretty damn big door. I think it's to accommodate for students with mutation quirks that greatly increase their height, Izuku remarked. Or, Katsuki retorted. It's there to look intimidating and remind everyone that UA doesn't fuck around. He reached for the handle, and upon opening it, they were greeted with the sight of several students chatting with each other throughout the classroom, while others were just sitting in their seats, either reading or attempting to sleep. One student in particular, however, enthusiastically moved towards them. Salutations. He began. I am Iida Tenya. He deeply bowed to them in a perfect 90-degree angle. It is a pleasure to meet you. Hi, Izuku greeted in return with a bow of his own, unsure of how else to respond to the other boy's enthusiasm. My name's Midoriya Izuku. And I'm Uraraka Ochako. Katsuki silently nodded in greeting and grunted out a, Bakugo Katsuki. It was here that Tenya had realized just who Izuku was. Midoriya-kun, I must apologize for my behavior towards you during the entrance exams, he said, bowing once more. It was highly rude of me to assume that you were there to disrupt the other examinees, but in reality, you had realized the true meaning behind the exam, and were about to tell them, didn't you? That was why you were the only one to move to rescue Uraraka-kun. No, it was nothing like that, Izuku said, waving his arms in front of him as he tried to diffuse the misunderstanding. I honestly didn't know about the rescue points until after getting the acceptance letter. Truly? Tenya asked in astonishment, before pushing up his glasses and slapping his fist onto his palm. Then I must endeavor to act as you do, so that I, too, may eventually call myself a hero. With a nod, he turned around to mingle with the other students, but suddenly let out an audible gasp when he noticed Katsuki. Bakugo-kun, he exclaimed. This behavior is outrageous. You should not desecrate the esteemed facilities of UA by putting something as filthy as your shoes on the desk. Katsuki frowned. You need to chill, glasses, he replied. It's not that big of a deal. Tenya made an indignant expression as he moved to start chopping the air with his arm. I will not chill. It is a highly disrespectful act that tarnishes the memory of the student who sat in that chair before you. Honestly, I didn't expect such behavior to come from the student with the highest number of villain points. Katsuki was getting increasingly irritated as the exchange between him and the other boy continued. He had initially wanted to rest his feet on his desk in an attempt to calm his nerves from the prospect of his first day of high school, but this hard-ass was making it near impossible, and was now just complaining about simple things like predecessors. And who are you two? If all you're going to do here is bicker, then just leave and stop wasting my time. At the sound of the tired voice, the ambient chatter of the classroom soon decreased into silence, as they all collectively turned to see a long-haired man wearing a black jumpsuit and gray scarf, along with a very bored expression on his face. When the room was finally silent, the man continued. It took you 5 seconds to quiet down as soon as I spoke up. Not bad, but not good either. We'll have the rest of the semester to work on that. He walked into the room as he was speaking, while also dragging what looked to be a yellow-orange sleeping bag. Anyway, my name is Aizawa Shota, and I'll be your homeroom teacher the whole time you'll be enrolled in the hero course. The man now known as Aizawa reached into his bag and pulled out a gym uniform. I apologize for being sudden, but I need you all in your gym clothes and onto the field as soon as possible. With that, the man left the room, leaving the other students to start following him and file out of the classroom to walk towards the locker rooms to get changed. Once all of the students had changed and were now standing on the field, Aizawa opened the wagon that he had seemingly brought with him, which was revealed to hold a numerous amount of softballs. It's about time, he said, turning to face the class. Today we're going to be doing a quirk assessment test. At that, the entire class was surprised and confused at the activity, especially since it was out of the blue. But what about the entrance ceremony and the orientation? Ochako asked him. It's a waste of time to spend hours just sitting around for such pointless events, the man replied, fishing out a softball and casually throwing it in the air. If you want, I can assign you to read the school handbook. It's simpler, and it gets the job done much faster. The teachers here at UA can generally do whatever they want, so long as it's effective in teaching the students. The administration will only really step in and take over if we're doing a piss-poor job. Turning back around, he looked towards Katsuki. Bakugo. At the sound of his name, the boy stood at full attention. You ended up with the highest score in the practical exam. What was your softball throw record in middle school? About 67 meters, he replied. Aizawa nodded and tossed him the softball and pointed towards a large white circle that was drawn on the field. Now try doing it here, but this time with your quirk. I don't really care what you do, so long as you stay in the circle. With a nod, Katsuki walked over to the circle and proceeded to lightly stretch, before getting into a pitcher's stance, and then throwing the ball with a cry of, "Aura!" A loud boom suddenly shook the field, and the ball was sent rocketing into the air and even breaking the sound barrier as he activated his explosion quirk to give it a large boost. Aizawa nodded in approval at the display, before turning back to the class. You should always know your maximum limits first. If you never try your very best, then there's absolutely no foundation in which you can grow to become a hero. With a beep of his phone, he held it up to show the distance the ball had traveled. 705.2 meters. The class was shocked at seeing the large number, with Izuku smirking as he shook his head. Always leave it to Kachan to go all out. We get to use our quirks however we want. This is awesome. I can't wait to see how I'll do here. This looks so fun and exciting. Aizawa turned to look at the person who had made the last comment. Really, now, he said, you think this gonna be fun? That this is gonna be some recreational icebreakers activity where you and the other students will get to let loose and have fun. With a slight grin, he continued. I'll tell you what, whoever ends up in last place, is who I'll be expelling. Let's see how fun you can make it. But that's not fair. Aizawa turned to look at Ochako with a blank stare. Life is never fair, he countered. In the world of heroics, mediocrity is forbidden. Failure to put in all of your effort out in the field could result in a villain's escape, or even worse, the death of a civilian. He then started to look at the class as a whole. Many of you have sacrificed blood, sweat, and tears in order to be accepted into the highest-ranking hero school in Asia, he continued. But that doesn't even scratch the surface of what you'll be facing during your time here. Even if you find the odds stacked against you, you must always find a way to go above and beyond. That is what it means to go, plus ultra. The mass of students were left in a solemn silence as Aizawa's speech sunk in, fully comprehending just what was in store for them, now that they were in the hero course. One student in particular, however, broke the silence with a sniff as he wiped a single tear from his eye. That was pretty manly. Izuku found himself nodding in agreement. Although Aizawa was being unnecessarily strict, that really was a cool speech he just did. Now, Aizawa continued, with a small grin breaking out onto his face. Let's begin. Izuku had to admit, he was really excited to see his classmates' quirks in action. Even though there was Aizawa's threat of expulsion for whoever came in last place looming over his head, this was still a learning experience to see how far his and Katsuki's training under All Might had paid off, and how far he could push himself with gold experience. And also to see how the two of them compared in situations outside of fighting. With great interest in Tenya's quirk and seeing how fast he had cleared the running track, he began to stare off into a random area on the ground, as he became deep in thought. Based on the mutation quirk in his calves, there's a good chance he's related to Ingenium, meaning that his quirk should be similar to a car engine's, with multiple gears. It looks like that's the fastest he can go in that distance, but it was really a shame he didn't have his notebook with him. Ochako, in the middle of walking over to him to try and make conversation, suddenly paused when she heard his muttering, and took a cautious step backwards. Does he do that a lot? She asked, turning to Katsuki. Just about every time he finds out about a new quirk, he replied. I tried to get him to stop talking to himself a lot over the years, but he gets pretty fanatic when it comes to studying quirks. Fairly sure he's even got a couple pages dedicated to you, too. Ochako looked away as she felt her face start to heat up. Oh. Deciding to instead turn her attention back to Izuku, she couldn't help find herself staring at his face as he continued to mutter up a storm, watching all of their other classmates run the track. Come on, Ochako, she thought, in an attempt to reason with herself. It's because he looks weird doing that, right? Slightly shaking her head, her thoughts then turned to Izuku's own quirk. When he had told her the name of his invisible to everyone but him, at least companion, and how it would repeatedly yell out the word, useless, as a battle cry, she was overcome with the strangest sense of déjà vu, although she couldn't seem to recall where she had heard the information before. She swore she had never seen nor heard of anyone who had done that before in her life, but there was a strange feeling of familiarity to the knowledge. Katsuki, meanwhile, had noticed her odd behavior, and was watching her out of the corner of his eye with a raised eyebrow, before ultimately deciding to ignore it. Eventually, it came time for Izuku's turn to run the test. Walking up to the starting line, he took a deep breath and began lightly stretching and mentally preparing himself, as he bent down into a running start position. Turning to his right, he saw Katsuki doing the same thing. Kachan. At the sound of his nickname, the boy turned to see Izuku holding out a fist to him. Ready to show everyone who's boss. Katsuki looked at the offered fist for a moment, before smirking and returning it. You know me so well, Deku. Turning their attention back to the track, a few moments of silence passed, before the robot that oversaw and recorded each score began to speak the countdown. On your mark, get set. With the sound of a gunshot, Izuku shot forward, with his legs imbued with gold experiences. Through countless hours of experimenting, Izuku had concluded that the speed at which gold experience could attack had to be somewhere close to, if not faster than the speed of sound, based on the fact that he couldn't even see gold experience's fists flying during a punching barrage. Unfortunately, however, it couldn't exactly apply to whenever he himself would use it to enhance his own body, because it had its own physical limits, and he could still vividly recall how painful that event had been. One day during the 10 months spent training for the exam, Izuku had tried to push himself as much as possible during a sprint exercise. And while he was able to run at a speed that far outclassed his middle school gym scores, it ended up with most, if not all of the muscles in his legs being torn apart from the massive strain. After about a minute of panicking from him, Katsuki, and Toshinori, they eventually remembered that he had the ability to heal himself, and so calmed down. Once he had repaired the damaged limbs, he received a stern warning from the man to be careful with pushing himself, and to count himself lucky for being able to undo any damage done with ease, which he had taken to heart. At least it wasn't too bad, even if the memory did keep him up at night from time to time. 4.13 seconds. The robot loudly announced. It seemed that Katsuki was the one with the upper hand, as he used his quirk to repeatedly ignite small explosions and propel himself forward, which eliminated the need to set his feet on the ground. Izuku wasn't too far behind, though, as he still managed to train his body up to the point of being able to run at a speed that was still impressive, managing to stay right behind him with a time of 4.46 seconds. Damn it, Izuku said, slightly disappointed that he couldn't beat his friend, but it was obvious that he would have the disadvantage no matter what. He briefly considered having gold experience throw him at full strength, but he didn't think Aizawa would appreciate the landing part. After another moment of recovering his stamina, he made his way over to Katsuki, who was busy studying his hands. Still don't regret not getting one for all. The other boy jokingly sniped without turning around. It would have been nice to wait an entire 3 seconds seeing you try to catch up, Izuku deadpanned. The other boy just barked out a laugh in response. Izuku stared at the grip device with a calculating expression, wondering what the best course of action was for this particular test. Obviously, if he tried to grip it as himself, he would end up getting a weak score, but it was a no-brainer that gold experience would be used here, so the question was how to use it. He could simply just have the golden being do the test for him, but to be honest, he liked freaking people out when it came to revealing the punch ghost. In the end, he opted to instead stack both his and gold experience's strength, which he hoped would give him a good enough score. 2-0. It seemed that in his haste to get the test over with, he forgot that gold experience possessed the strength to actually break the device, and rather loudly, at that. As he stared at the now mangled piece of technology, Izuku briefly wondered if Aizawa would let this slide, before looking up and noticing the stares the people he was nearest to were giving him. Whoops, he said, in an attempt to break the awkward silence. Deku, it's a grip strength test, not a break everything test, Katsuki snidely remarked. Before Izuku could let out a retort, he noticed a flash of movement in his peripheral vision, and turned to see a boy with the mutation of a bird's head holding the device, with a large, shadow-like creature similar in appearance floating next to him. Izuku's eyes widened at the sight and he suppressed a gasp, before quickly making his way towards him. Wait, you have one, too. At his excited words, the other boy just looked at him with confusion from the lack of context. What are you talking about? Your quirk. Izuku summoned gold experience in his growing excitement at finally seeing another person with a quirk similar to his. Can you see mine? He asked, enthusiastically gesturing to the space next to him. He only received a blank stare in return. I'm afraid I don't see anything. Oh. An awkward silence passed between the two of them, before the boy decided to speak up. I am Tokiyami Fumikage, he began, then pointed to his shadowy companion. And this is Dark Shadow. On cue, the being silently waved. And you, Midoriya Izuku, he replied, his disappointment making itself known in his tone of voice. I apologize for disturbing you, Tokiyami-kun. Fumikage noted the change in Izuku's behavior, and continued to speak in an attempt to make the situation less awkward. Does your quirk function similarly to mine? At seeing his face light up, he mentally pat himself on the back for a job well done. The two boys spent the next few minutes comparing their respective quirks and the abilities each had. Izuku had found it very interesting to know that different levels of light directly affected Dark Shadow's power, and Fumikage was intrigued to know that gold experience's strength was dependent on Izuku's mental fortitude. But I don't think gold experience is sentient, Izuku said, when the topic of control came up, and why he kept referring to his own companion as an it. And it always responds to what I'm thinking or feeling, but it'll usually move by itself if I'm in danger. Fumikage hummed. I usually have to verbally command Dark Shadow in order for him to do what I want. Generally, he's usually very compliant most of the time, but if there's very little light, then there is a high risk of him getting out of control. Izuku nodded in understanding, before suddenly remembering something that was quite an important detail when it came to gold experience. Wait, can everyone else see yours? Fumikage gave him an odd look. Yes. Why do you ask? Because absolutely no one can see gold experience, and it doesn't make any sense. He exclaimed. Quirks are directly related to the physical body, so everyone should be able to see it. Ours function so similarly, but yours is summoned by floating out of your clothes, and mine just appears out of thin air and just stands there until I think of a command, or will it to go away. Well, that certainly was odd, Fumikage noted. To be honest, he did wonder about how Dark Shadow would look with legs from time to time, instead of just floating there so. Wait. Fumikage's eyes slightly widened at the epiphany he just experienced. While the chances of it were very small, they were still there, and the characteristics of Izuku's quirk lined up with the stories he remembered being told when he was younger, some years after he had first manifested Dark Shadow. I see, he said neutrally, while his thought process started working at hyperspeed at the prospect of the true nature of Izuku's quirk. Unfortunately, the one person he thought was best suited to talk to Izuku currently wasn't present. Weighing the softball in his hand, Izuku thought of how to approach this next test using gold experience. While he could simply just have it throw the ball for him, it wouldn't really get him a good score. Oh sure, he knew he would get a better score than most of his classmates, but Katsuki had managed to get over 700 meters, and Ochako beat him with an infinity, just by sending the ball to space. Unfortunately, no amount of punching and turning things into animals would help him with throwing a ball. Izuku's eyes lit up. Wait, that's it. With a sly grin breaking out onto his face, the faint sound of reversing musical notes played, and the softball was transformed into a alpine swift, which he then directed to fly for as long as physically possible. While Gold Experience's strength far exceeded that of a normal human's, Aizawa did say that the only thing he cared about was everyone staying in the circle. He just turned the ball into a bird. Geez, just how many quirks does this guy have? He's only got one, as far as I can tell, unless he's been lying to me the whole time I've known him. Aizawa, meanwhile, simply stared off into the direction the swift was currently flying. With a nod of approval, he turned to Izuku. How long until it reverts back? Izuku just grinned in response. There is no time limit, he replied. All of the objects that I've turned into animals can only turn back if I want them to. And I've never tested how far my effective range can go up to, but I can still feel a connection all the way from here. So I guess that means I'll just keep it going until I want it to stop, which is probably never, when it comes to this test. Aizawa grew silent for a few moments before speaking. I'll just give you an infinity and move on. After all of the tests in Aizawa's quirk apprehension test had been completed, he directed the class to head back to the front of the field, where they were all eagerly waiting to see how they performed. Whatever your total score will be is just all of the scores you got from the tests added together. Tapping on the screen of his phone, a large hologram was displayed for all the class to see, which displayed the individual students' scores and where they ranked when compared to each other. After a moment of searching, Izuku found his name ranked at 4th place, with Katsuki and Ochako respectively being placed at 3rd and 11th. He moved to walk over and congratulate his friends, but then paused when he heard the sound of a panicking voice. Oh no. Oh no. Turning around, Izuku saw a short boy with purple balls for hair holding his head in his hands, looking as if he were in the midst of the beginning of a panic attack. Reflexively, he turned back to look at the scoreboard, and saw that Minoru Mineta was the name in last place. Mineta-kun, he tentatively asked. When the grape-haired boy looked up at him and confirmed his fears, Izuku felt pity begin to well up inside him, as the reality of the situation made itself known. It wasn't fair that that boy would be kicked out at the end of the day, because apparently it didn't matter how hard he had worked to get into UA. If he was unable to show he had potential, then there was no groundwork where he could improve on to become a hero. Mineta. The boy visibly flinched when he heard Aizawa speak. While I did say I was going to expel whoever came in last place, you managed to show that you at least had some potential. So congratulations, you can stay. Oh, thank you, sensei. Thank you, the boy exclaimed, bowing as deep as he could out of gratefulness to the teacher. When he stood back up, Izuku noticed that his posture and body language had visibly changed. Well, I think this calls for a celebration. He turned around to face the crowd. Hey Yaoyorozu, Uraraka. How about we go to my place after school, and you two show me your goodies so we can celebrate. At hearing his proposition, all of the girls and a large portion of the boys in the class were visibly disgusted, while the girls in question began to feel increasingly self-conscious. Okay, you know what? Aizawa growled out. Never mind. Grabbing the boy by the back of the shirt, he dragged him to the edge of the crowd, where he started to berate him. Did you seriously think that kind of behavior's tolerable here? Before Minoru could let out a reply, Aizawa cut him off. Actually, don't say anything, I don't care. Dropping him, he turned around and made his way towards the locker rooms. Get your things. We're going to the principal's office. Now. But, do I look like I care? While the man's volume was still somewhat quiet, his latent fury could be felt. Let's go. You know what? Ochako spoke up, as she watched the two walk away. I don't feel so bad, anymore. Izuku nodded as he felt himself agreeing. Neither do I. After the debacle that was Minoru Mineta's sexual harassment and his likely expulsion, the rest of Class 1A returned to the locker rooms to get dressed and went back to their classroom, where they found a stack of packets containing information about the Hero course's curriculum. After mingling for a bit and everyone introducing themselves to each other, they all went their separate ways home, with Izuku, Ochako, and Katsuki all walking towards the train station. Excuse me. Someone yelled out behind them. Turning around, they saw Tenya doing his best to quickly walk up to them. Do you mind if I join you? He asked, stopping in front of them. Well, I don't mind, Iida-kun, Izuku answered, with Ochako and Katsuki nodding in agreement. The trio now becoming a quartet, Tenya fell into step beside Ochako, and they continued walking outside of UA High School's grounds. A few moments of silence passed between the teenagers, before Tenya cleared his throat. Uraraka-kun, he began. I am sorry that you had to deal with such harassment on the first day of classes. I was not expecting such deplorable behavior at UA out of all places, but, there's a first time for everything, I suppose. It's fine, I guess. Ochako said quietly, feeling herself start to grow ashamed at having been reminded about the earlier event. Sensing the mood turn sour and awkward, Katsuki opted to change the subject. Deku, Uraraka, and I are gonna go get some food. You wanna come with? Tenya thought about his offer for a moment, before coming to a decision. While I appreciate the offer, Bakugo-kun, I have some matters to attend to at home. Perhaps another time. With a shrug from Katsuki, they continued to walk in silence. Can I call you Deku, too? Ochako eventually spoke up, as she turned to Izuku. Looking to his other side, he silently asked Katsuki if he was okay with it. The hell you lookin' at me for? He asked. He leaned forward slightly so that he could face Ochako. It's just the other way you can read his name, Uraraka, so I don't really care if anyone else uses the nickname. But I will start throwing hands if you start calling me, Kachan. Sounds good, she replied, and the overall mood became much lighter, as Tenya started questioning them. How they thought their performances in the entrance exam went. Upon making his way outside of Class 1A and towards the school's entrance, Fumikage spotted Midoriya, Bakugo, Uraraka, and Iida all walking together. He began to move towards them with the intent on joining them, but he was stopped by the sound of a male voice whispering in his ear. So what do you think? Asked Dark Shadow, who was now floating beside his head. He's interesting, to say the least, Fumikage replied. While some of his mannerisms are a bit much, I do think we could end up becoming good friends. I meant the quirk, the shadowy being reiterated. Do you think Midoriya's quirk could be one of those? Based on their interaction with Izuku earlier that day, Fumikage had a very strong suspicion as to the true nature of the other boy's quirk, but he wasn't someone that had the ability or resources to find out. But he knew someone that did, however. He nodded. I don't know for certain, he began, reaching into his pocket and pulling his phone out. Turning it on, he searched for a particular contact, and upon finding it, began calling the number, patiently waiting for it to be answered. But even so, this is something that the Foundation would need to know about. Fumikage asked the man who was on the other line. What is it? Good afternoon, uncle, the boy greeted. I apologize if this is a bad time to be calling, but I think one of my classmates may be a stand user. As the bell rang throughout the school to signal the start of homeroom, the entirety of Class 1A, save for one, settled into their seats, patiently waiting for their teacher to show up. However, a tense silence slowly filled the room, as they collectively remembered who it was that occupied the seat behind Izuku and in front of Momo Yaoyorozu, along with a few others glancing between her and Ochako. Not a single one of them had missed Mineta's advances towards the two girls, along with the subsequent berating Aizawa had given him the day before, and were now anticipating the boy's arrival and the awkward confrontation. Needless to say, most, if not all of the students viewed him with disdain, but to some, it was particularly evident, primarily in Izuku. He had heard a few stories from his mother about how before meeting his father, she had received her fair share of leers and comments, along with a street thug's attempt to come onto her that was thankfully stopped by one of the local heroes. The night before, he and Katsuki had talked about their suspicions on whether or not Mineta had been expelled, or if he was simply let off with a warning, though the latter seemed unlikely with how mad Aizawa had looked. Looking to his right, he saw that Ochako was keeping her eyes firmly glued to her desk, and briefly wondered if the girl sitting 2 seats behind him was doing the same. Needless to say, Minoru Mineta had already become the black sheep of Class 1A. When the door had finally opened, several students had tensed up in anticipation of seeing the pervert, but immediately relaxed at seeing that it was only their homeroom teacher. Closing the door behind him, he walked over to the desk at the front of the room, stopping in front of it. I'm sure many of you are wondering what happened with Mineta, so I'll just tell you up front, he's been moved to general studies. At seeing several shocked expressions coming from the students, he continued. We'll be down to 19 students until someone else takes the spot. Don't you think he should have been expelled? Called out a pink-skinned girl named Mina Ishido, who was raising her hand. What I think and what's allowed are two different things when it concerns this, Ishido, he answered, before looking back towards the class as a whole. Contrary to what I've told you all yesterday, only the principal has the authority to expel students. What I am allowed to do, however, is kick as many people out of my class as I want, meaning you'll only be seeing him in the halls and in the cafeteria from here on out. So will someone from 1B be transferred here, then? Izuku asked, raising his own hand. It felt rather odd to have to go through the school year with an odd number of students in their class. No, Aizawa said, because Vlad King handpicked all of the students for his class. Nezu and the other teachers put all of you with me. The only way for the vacancy to be filled in is from a general studies student who performs well during the sports festival. Is that how he got into the hero course? Izuku suddenly thought, intrigued by his teacher's words. An erasure-type quirk would be just about useless when faced against robots in the practical exam, so he had to have joined the hero course somehow. So, Ochako began with a quiet voice. So you're saying there's a chance he could come back? Aizawa's tired expression slightly softened at her question. It's highly unlikely, considering what he'll be matched up against, he replied, shaking his head. After what he pulled, there's no way I would allow him back into the hero course this year, even if he did somehow manage to do well, so be ready to have a new classmate after the festival ends. Soon after, a knock was heard coming from the door, and upon opening it, Present Mike, or rather, Hizashi Yamada, walked through the door, signifying the start of the first period, English class. Yo Deku, hand me some pepper. Wordlessly, Izuku reached into his pocket and pulled out a pink eraser. Closing his hand in a fist, he concentrated for a few moments, and upon feeling a shift in his hand, opened it back up to reveal a small amount of black peppercorns in place of the eraser. You owe me an eraser, Kachan, he said, extending his arm out and over his friend's hand to prevent the spice from spilling on the table. Yeah, I'll give it to you when we get back, Katsuki replied, as he used his quirk to discreetly create minute explosions in his hand to grind the peppercorn into a fine powder, before mixing it into his curry and taking a bite, satisfied at the new spice level. Tenya, meanwhile, had seen the entire exchange, and was not happy at how nonchalant the two were being. Midoriya-kun, he hissed. I can't believe that you and Bakugo-kun would be so reckless as to be using your quirks so carelessly, and in public, no less. Katsuki rolled his eyes in response as he continued eating his food. Relax, glasses. It's not like it's gonna hurt anyone. It doesn't matter if no one gets hurt, Tenya continued. It is against the rules of UA for non-mutant type quirks to be displayed out in public spaces unless in emergency situations are authorized to do so. What if a teacher or faculty member walked by and saw? Except that didn't happen, now did it? Katsuki countered, refusing to back down from the argument. Tenya sighed as he pushed up the rim of his glasses, feeling that he was going to get nowhere with the other boy. Fine, I will concede, he said. but I must implore that you use caution in the future. Katsuki raised an eyebrow as he found himself feeling challenged, along with the urge to stand up. Are you telling me I'm not already being careful? Ochako, sensing the situation starting to escalate, quickly intervened to keep it from escalating even further. So who do you think the basic heroics teacher is gonna be? She asked, slightly raising her voice. Thankfully, this had the desired effect, as Katsuki visibly calmed down and continued to eat his food, while Tenya grew thoughtful as he thought of an answer to her question. I am uncertain as to who exactly will be teaching us, he began, but there is no doubt that it will be a pro hero, just as how our teachers thus far have been such. Oh yeah, that reminds me, Iida-kun, Izuku chimed in, having been reminded about something from the day before. Are you by any chance related to Ingenium? Tenya perked up at hearing his question. Ah, so you've noticed the similarities between our quirks. Well, to answer your question, Ingenium is in fact my older brother. He looked ahead towards a random spot on the wall as he held a fist close to his chest. I desire to become a hero so that I may one day follow in his footsteps and make him and my family proud. Ochako let out a deep breath through her nose as Tenya spoke, satisfied that the exchange between him and Katsuki was interrupted before it could get worse. I am coming through the door like a normal person. Despite the bell already having rung, Toshinori decided to instead wait outside for a few more minutes, before making his grand entrance into Class 1A. He had even made the choice to wear his previous costume from what the fans were calling the Silver Age, before he had cemented himself as the world's symbol of peace, and subsequently causing a new Golden Age of heroics. To be honest, he was kind of scared about the prospect of teaching 19 teenagers how pro heroes operate in the field. Aside from Izuku and Katsuki, the last person he had mentored had been Mirai, and he could still vividly recall how that had ended. But considering how the two boys had managed to land the top 2 scores in the practical exam, surely it wouldn't prove to be too difficult. Stopping in front of the room, he turned to face the class with his fists resting on his hips, in a pose similar to that of Superman. Hello, students, he greeted. And welcome to Basics of Heroics. In this class, you will learn the very foundations of what it means to be a hero, as well as work together to face the various trials and tribulations that will come your way. He paused for a moment for dramatic effect, before raising a finger. But fear not, because I am here to guide you through this course, should you ever need it. Seeing that he still had everyone's complete attention, Toshinori felt his trademark grin start to become more and more genuine. Yosh. Now then, he took a brief moment to consider his next decision, before inwardly shrugging and striking a strongman's pose. Today, we will be commencing battle training. But that's not all, today is also the day you will be receiving your hero costumes. Picking up the remote on the desk behind him, he held it out towards the wall to his right, which caused the several compartments housed within to reveal themselves, containing multiple briefcases that were labeled numbers 1 through 19. Many of your costumes were made in accordance with your Quirk registrations, as well as some specific requests you sent in before the school year started. Now, I understand you're excited to see what your respective cases hold, but I must ask that you be quick with getting dressed, as well as to meet me at ground beta. Now off we go. We don't have all day, folks. With that settled, Toshinori marched out of the classroom and towards the mock city, leaving the students to gawk over what the support department had made for them. After double-checking that he was wearing everything he needed, Izuku stored the briefcase containing his hero costume in his locker and moved to make his way out of the locker room, but not before taking a moment to stop in front of the large mirror beside the entrance and see how he looked. His costume consisted of a dark green long coat with a red zipper, white gloves, and black combat pants and boots. As for accessories, he also had 3 ladybug brooches, which were attached to the left and right sides of his torso, along with the third at the base of the zipper. A few years before, he had made a few sketches of how he originally wanted his costume to look, with an appearance that closely resembled All Might's, but when he showed Katsuki and asked him for his opinion, he was flat out told to come up with something else that isn't as cringeworthy. Lookin' pretty slick there, Midoriya. Izuku turned around to see Eijiro Kirishima walking up to him, wearing his own costume. Walking beside him was Tenya, who in turn was wearing a suit of armor that closely resembled that of his brother's, and was carrying a helmet in the crook of his arm. I must agree, he said. You do look rather stylish. Izuku smiled at the words. Thanks, you too. I really like your costumes, too. Are they styled that way with your quirks in mind? Indeed it was. Tenya declared proudly, as he gestured to the golden engines on his calves. My boots contain a special coolant, as well as other mechanisms, that allow me to use my quirk for longer, as well as help augment its performance. And I know that it's kind of weird not having a shirt, Eijiro spoke up. But they're kind of useless to me, since I need to be up close and personal to actually get anything done. Oh that's right, your quirk is hardening your skin, right, Kirishima-kun? Izuku asked. The other boy nodded. Yeah, that's right. Oi, get out of the way, interjected a new voice. You're all blocking the door. At the words, the three boys collectively turned to see Katsuki standing behind them wearing his costume, along with a pair of large grenades as gauntlets. Catching sight of Izuku's costume, he gave him a brief once-over, before nodding in approval. Not bad. Better than your last one, at least. Now come on, All Might said not to take too long. With that, he walked out of the locker room. Bakugo-kun is right, it is time that we head out to the meeting point, Tenya said, putting on his helmet and following Katsuki out, with Izuku and Eijiro close behind. Stopping just outside of the large tunnel that led to the mock city, which was coincidentally the same one he had had his practical exam in, Izuku was mildly awed to see all of his other classmates wearing their costumes, as they all looked very unique and impressive. However, it seemed that there was someone missing from the mass of students. Wow, Deku-kun, your costume looks really cool. Ah, never mind. Turning around to face Ochako, Izuku was about to thank her for the compliment, but instead froze at seeing the skin-tight bodysuit that was her costume. A pretty girl, one that he was also friends with, was wearing a skin-tight bodysuit. Yup, looks like he lost. It really gives off the feel of an anime character, you know. She continued, while absent-mindedly pulling at the fabric on her forearm. I probably should have been more specific with what I wanted, they just ended up giving me a bodysuit. I probably don't look too good in this. Izuku, however, was thinking the exact opposite. He already knew that Ochako was obviously very pretty, especially considering how he found himself attracted to her after only knowing her for 2 days. But seeing her now, and wearing that, she looked utterly gorgeous. Thanks. Ochako managed to squeak out, bringing him out of his thoughts. She ceased her fidgeting with her arm, and was now suddenly staring down at the floor, her face turning redder and redder by the second. Izuku was confused by her sudden behavior. Why is she acting like that? His eyes widened as the realization of what he had just done made itself known to him. Apparently, it looks like he had accidentally said that out loud, instead of just thinking it. Oh fuck, he said that out loud. Wait, I didn't mean it like that. Izuku exclaimed, as he felt his face start to heat up, along with frantically waving his arms out in front of him in an attempt to do damage control. I mean, I don't think that you're not pretty, and, well, I just, A bit farther away, Katsuki was watching the two teenagers interact with each other with a knowing smirk on his face. While he himself never really had much interest when it came to dating, he sure as hell wasn't blind. After all, how would anyone become the #1 hero if they didn't pay attention to what was happening with the people around them? He knew about every single crush Izuku had had during middle school, and would often pressure him to just get it over with and make a damn move already, to which he always chickened out of, but he had a feeling that this new one with Ochako was pretty different to the "she's pretty" type of crush most teenagers had. Is it just me? Began a voice to his right, causing him to turn and see Tenya with his hand resting against the opposite side of his face in a whispering gesture. Or does it seem like there appears to be something happening between those two? Katsuki chuckled as he turned back to face the pair, finding himself agreeing with him. You and me both, glasses. You and me both. Sometimes Izuku really hated his tendency to mutter his thoughts out loud. Sure, it really helped him collect his thoughts when taking notes for hero analyses, but out of all the things that he could have said, it had to be the single most awkward thing ever. When All Might began announcing what it was that the class was going to be doing in the mock city, he felt an overwhelming urge to just walk up and hug his mentor, along with thanking every single god he currently knew the names of at the top of his head. Honestly, the man couldn't have chosen a better time to give Izuku the opportunity he needed to discreetly inch away from what was sure to be an awkward conversation with Ochako. Why couldn't he have just kept his damn mouth shut? Instead of just thanking her for how she liked his costume, he ended up making her uncomfortable, just like Mineta had the day before. No doubt Katsuki was thinking of a way to make fun of him for pussying out, but what else could he have done? Tell a girl he had only known for 2 days in total that he had a weird crush on her. He'd rather be quirkless. When All Might announced that they would be partnered up through the use of lottery, he almost breathed out a sigh of relief when he realized that he would have a lot of time to prepare himself for the inevitable conversation with Ochako. However, before we continue, the hero began. I must note that since there's an odd number of you, one of the teams will have to have 3 people, so I will give the person who does not get picked for a team the option of which one to join. Reaching into a small box, he pulled out 2 small slips of paper, where he began to read them out loud. And for Team A, we have Midoriya Izuku and Uraraka Ochako. Izuku sighed as he suppressed a groan. Why must you do this to me, Kami-sama? This was the absolute last thing he wanted to happen. All he wanted was to have the rest of the day to regret everything in his life before walking with Ochako, Tenya, and Katsuki after school, but now it looked like he only had mere minutes. One by one, All Might continued to announce the names for each team, until there was only one person left who had not been called. Well, looks like you get to pick which team to join, young Tokiyami. Fumikage paused for a moment to consider his options. While he was interested in seeing Midoriya's power in a fight and comparing Gold Experience's strength with Dark Shadow's, he had only known about the other boy's power for a day, not to mention there would be other times to confirm if there was any truth to Joshiro's stories. I will refrain from making a decision for now, sensei. All Might nodded. Fair enough, but if you haven't chosen a team yet by the time the last 2 teams go up against each other, then I will have to pick for you. Of course. Do you have a plan in mind, Bakugo-kun? Tenya asked, as he watched Katsuki pace back and forth in front of the false bomb they would be defending. Katsuki grunted in reply as he continued his pacing. He didn't like admitting it, but when it came to a close-quarters battle, Izuku would always have the upper hand. It was bad enough that Gold Experience was invisible to everyone but its user, but just about every time they tried to spar with each other, all he had to do was use that damn life giver to stun him and win the fight, until Toshinori asked him to stop relying on it. He glanced towards the large grenade-like gauntlets on his wrist. Thankfully, even if he ended up outmatched, at least he had some countermeasures Izuku's dominance in close range. It was a good thing he didn't have one for all, at least. Otherwise, Deku would have been virtually unstoppable. He snorted as the irony of the nickname wasn't lost on him. While the word itself was generally used as an insult, he started calling Izuku that when they were 4 because it really was the other way of reading the kanji of his name, and he was far from useless. Where Gold Experience lacked in raw power, Katsuki had him beat there, at least it more than made up for in its sheer versatility. Due to growing up together, he knew many of Izuku's weaknesses, and unfortunately, he knew his as well. All right, Iida, I've got something, he began, as he explained the plan he came with that would best be able to deal with Izuku and Ochako's quirks. So, began Ochako, who was looking up at the building that she and Izuku were tasked to infiltrate. What do you think they'll be doing, Deku-kun? When she didn't hear a response, she turned to her side. Deku-kun. Izuku, meanwhile, was in deep thought as he thought of a strategy against the defending team, with a hand to his chin. Kacchan and Iida-kun's quirks are reliant on close range, so they'll have to get close in order to be effective, unless Kacchan has something planned for his lack of range, but knowing him, he'd try to play it safe, unless he wants to risk damaging part of the building. He looked towards Ochako. Uraraka-san, he began. Their best bet is to try and split us up. When it comes to one-on-one battles, I'll be able to win easily, so they might try to. Villain team. Interrupted the booming voice of the number 1 hero. The time for the planning phase has now expired. Hero team. Your mission starts now. Well, there goes the plan, Izuku thought, as he and Ochako walked through the front door of the building. Deku-kun. Yeah, let's talk later, okay. Sure. It was quiet as Izuku and Ochako slowly walked through the first and second floors of the practice building. A bit too quiet, if he had to be honest. By the time they reached the third, his suspicion was now starting to grow into paranoia. Standing at the top of the stairs, he held out a hand behind him and towards Ochako, in a gesture for her to stay where as she was. "What is it?" she asked in a whisper. "Did you hear someone?" Without a reply, Izuku pulled a brooch off of his chest, before throwing it to the ground ahead of him with a clatter. A short moment later, the brooch then transformed into a common garter snake, which he commanded to search for any nearby heat signatures. After about a minute had passed, it began hissing loudly, and he walked towards the edge of the room to see Tenya casually standing there. Well, he began, sarcastically clapping in sync with the greeting. "I'd say, welcome, but I'm sure you've no patience for such pleasantries. I would congratulate you on deducing our locations, but I'm sure you're not the type for such pleasantries." Neither Izuku nor Ochako said anything in reply, causing Tenya to dramatically sigh. "And still, you don't speak. Very well. I will personally see to it that this building marks your final resting place, hero." Izuku only had a split second to stick out a hand in front of Ochako and command Gold Experience to push them away as hard as it could, before Katsuki suddenly shot out from a nearby wall with his quirk activated, having made contact with the area the two had just been occupying, causing the powdered debris to kick up and create a smokescreen. "Uraraka-san, are you okay?" Izuku asked urgently, quickly standing up to defend his teammate. "Yeah, I'm fine," Ochako replied. "But how do we get past them?" Izuku quickly scanned the grid-like structure of his surroundings before answering her. "I'm going to try and distract them, and I want you to try to see if you can flank around and go up the stairs." "Got it." With that, she went off towards the side of the room, leaving Izuku in the middle, as he dropped into a fighting stance in anticipation of the next attack. A few moments later, the smoke cleared to reveal Katsuki displaying a manic grin on his face. "Fight me, if you're ready to die." Izuku braced himself as the other boy ran towards him with his hand outstretched, commanding Gold Experience to stand in front of him and stop him in his tracks. Before he could attack, however, Katsuki shot out his other hand and fired off an explosion, changing his momentum and allowing him to vault over Izuku. Quickly turning around, he saw Katsuki pull the pin on the large grenade-like gauntlet on his arm, which triggered an extreme blast of energy to erupt from it, and was quickly destroying everything in its path. Gold Experience yelled out a cry as it threw a fist to match the blast. MUDA. Elsewhere, Ochako was busy running up the stairs towards the 5th floor, where the bomb the villains were tasked on guarding was supposed to be housed. When she finally reached the floor, she looked around in confusion at seeing nothing but an empty room. "Come on, where is it, where is it?" she muttered, as she walked around the room. This wasn't making any sense. Was the bomb actually something that was small, and All Might didn't tell them on purpose? Or did they actually end up moving it to a different room? Hearing a snort behind her, Ochako whipped around to see Tenya casually standing in the doorway. "Did you seriously think that we would leave the objective unguarded? If you wish to help your partner, then you will face me." He began to slowly walk forward, causing her to instinctively take a step back and look at her surroundings. Remembering his speed-oriented quirk, Ochako knew that simply rushing to the doorway before he could would obviously fail, but seeing the large window to her left was starting to give her an idea. Tenya, however, noticed her movements and quickly came to the same conclusion. She can't be serious, he thought, assuming that she was only trying to come up with any solutions to escape her current predicament. But it seemed Ochako really was serious, as she made a break towards the window, before jumping out of it. Tenya let out a rare curse, as he activated his quirk in the hopes of intercepting her. Unfortunately, he was too far away, and was now looking down to see Ochako floating above the ground. "Our release," she faintly cried out, before dropping to the ground and running back inside the building. Tenya immediately turned around to make a mad dash back down to the 3rd floor, as he put his hand to his ear. "Bakugo-kun. Uraraka-kun's figured it out and is making her way back to your location." Izuku cursed as he threw out a Gold Experience enhanced fist, only for Katsuki to dodge it again and send a blast to his side. He knew that the other boy was well aware that he would end up winning the fight if he managed to get close, which was why Katsuki kept his distance and was dodging all of his attacks, almost always countering with his own, which the golden being thankfully kept tanking or parrying. However, he wasn't sure if he would be able to keep this up. The 10 months spent training with All Might alongside cleaning the beach was largely spent sparring to develop the use of their quirks, and he had admittedly gotten lazy more than once, confident that gold experience would be able to take care of things for him. And now it seemed that mindset was coming to bite him in the ass. Eventually, Katsuki ceased his attack and was now standing a few meters away, giving Izuku a few precious moments to rest. Damn, he panted, as he struggled to stay standing. You, sure are relentless. Kachan. Katsuki let out a low chuckle in response. That's the point, Deku. Izuku's eyes narrowed at the other boy's words. It made perfect sense for Katsuki to fight him instead of Ochako, considering that both of their quirks were oriented towards combat and that they knew how each other fought the best, but seeing as how there's been no announcement of Ochako being captured or the bomb being secured, it meant that there had to be something else going on. As if on cue, he heard Ochako's voice in his communicator. Deku-kun, the bomb's on the 3rd floor. Izuku's eyes widened as the reasoning for Tenya and Katsuki's attempt at an ambush wasn't on the top floor was made clear. But if the bomb was near his location, then where? Katsuki noticed Izuku's posture shift into that of someone getting ready to run. Now, Iida. Izuku whipped around, issuing a command to Gold Experience to protect him, but Tenya had managed to slam into him first, and was now quickly pushing him into the wall. Imbuing his entire body with the golden beings and bracing himself, Izuku hissed as his back impacted with the wall, making a small crater. But before he could attack in retaliation, he paused when he noticed that there was something oddly bright that stuck out like a sore thumb. Tenya had wrapped the capture tape around his arm during his tackle. Nice work, glasses, Katsuki said, who was casually jogging up to them. Now, all we need to do is find. The bomb has been defused. Boomed the voice of All Might. Hero team wins. Hope you guys enjoy first part of this story. Do like, share and subscribe.